7:05, and we'll call to order our work session for the Planning and Zoning Commission covering the comprehensive plan. Chris, I know you sent out a lot of documents. I wasn't sure how you wanted to step through these, maybe by what you have up there on that slide.
Maybe. So I didn't want to go through all those documents. That was a lot of background information. I just thought it would be useful, so I organized it by folders. But what I wanted to get through was the natural environment chapter that I sent out, section 4, and then the land use chapter, section 5, which I brought tonight. I obviously understand that you haven't read it yet, but I'd like to walk through it and explain how I incorporated the comments from the last meeting, and also talk about some changes I think I'd like to introduce.
Changes to what you had discussed last month?
Concepts, yeah.
Okay.
Based on really digging in
Okay.
to the sea level rise issue and doing a lot of research. And I was left with this level of angst after our last meeting at Larry's last comment. Can you
refresh us what that comment was?
He said, I really like the town center concept, even though I have concerns about it being located where
No
sea
water.
level is most likely to be impactful. And that's, I'm paraphrasing, but that stuck with me. That from that moment until now, I've just been processing. So I did a lot of research about how to develop in those contexts and what that land used to be, what it is now. We'll talk about that. I hope to talk about it tonight. So on the natural environment section, are there any particular comments or questions? Any feedback? This is just technically this satisfies the sensitive areas requirement under state law. There has to be a chapter of a comprehensive plan that deals with sensitive environmental areas, like the ones I mentioned here, steep slopes, shorelines, wetlands, floodplains. And this is different than the previous comp plan because it addresses sea level rise as well. It's much more of an inventory type of chapter, but there are a series of recommendations at the end. My approach in comprehensive plan writing is not always to specify every specific thing that a town will do to protect the environment, for instance, because there are already laws in place, like the critical area regulations, the subdivision regulations, zoning. We don't have to say, apply the zoning ordinance. Well, we apply the zoning. We don't necessarily have to do that. What I thought was most important was to draw out the 5 or 6 key recommendations that the town can commit to and can work to achieve over the next 20 years.
So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions real quick. So, and I was like you, there were a couple of things I was thinking about when we left last time. And I think I wanted to just remember that this is a 20-year plan. And again, I think we stressed that a lot when we had the community discussion stuff when we kicked it off. And it's hard because we tend to focus on near-term stuff, and I know I do it at work, and it's again that roadmap for a 20-year, and some of it may somewhere through there because we update it every 10 years. It may get some course correction stuff, but we're trying to think about where the things. I think some of what you guide us on is where we could be when we're looking at some of the model stuff 20 years down the road. The other thing, and it came up after our meeting when I gave a quick summary of just some of the discussion at the town council meeting in July, or late July. And And again, I'm sure a lot of you have been reading. There's a lot going on in the Calvert County Comprehensive Plan, which I didn't realize they started their review back in 2015, and they're still at it. Not that I'm want to take 4 years to have a lot of hate and miscontent.
They have some very organized opposition, very professionally organized opposition.
They do. And the reason I mentioned the Calvert County one is, how did, have you taken a look? I know I have not, of how they address some of these, like sea rise and things, and are we out of step? Are we in step? And again, we're a much tighter area we're focused in, so they have a lot of areas that aren't affected by sea rise, but in the areas where they do, they clearly have some town center stuff impacted by that. And what are some of the, maybe if you haven't, I would think we should at least consider how, some of the things they're doing or considering. And I haven't, none of the public comment I've read or seen is centered around what they're doing with respect to sea level rise and things like that, which is a little surprising.
Most about the growth issue there. But yes, I have read their comprehensive plan and have it. I even have it with me tonight, and it is on the server, the Dropbox server. Their focus is really detailed in that Calvert County Flood Resiliency Program, and which kind of, if you boil it down, says we're going to continue using state and county monies to buy out properties that are repetitive loss properties, and to require that new buildings or rehabs be elevated 3 feet above the, with a 3-foot freeboard, 3 feet above the base flood elevation. And that's their approach right now.
Okay.
Their town centers per se are not impacted. It's more the rural areas like Brooms Island, Solomon's, with the exception of Solomon's.
Okay.
But no, there's no daylight between what we're talking about and what the county's talking
Okay.
about.
I had just a process question. I had sent you some comments to which you responded, and I saw some comments by Laura. Did each of the commissioners receive everybody's comments? I don't know whether there were any other comments.
I think so.
I don't know where the flow of information is amongst
Well,
ourselves.
it's all, yours are all in Dropbox, so that's,
Yeah.
In terms of process,
I
I just
didn't see
replied to the
yours.
Dropbox comments so that it would be available to anybody who's seeing it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get up to speed with whatever comments any of the other commissioners might have had.
Yeah, I didn't reply to, or did I? We emailed it briefly about,
I emailed, but I really didn't get a lot of response.
right.
That is in response to your
Yeah.
comment.
I haven't submitted any comments.
email.
All right. That was just a process. I just wanted to get up to speed as to what we know and what we don't know from each other.
So what we have here is this was your original version. True? Okay.
So what? It's. I want to deviate a little bit from what I intended to do to mention something that's talked about in the draft, but I want to bring it out from the very beginning.
Okay.
We have seen these sea level rise maps. They're based on projections done by the state Climate Commission in 2013. The maps show 5.7 foot elevation or increase in sea level, and targets that to the year 2100. It also, the 2013 projection also contained a 2050 projection timescale and projected the increase to be 2.1 feet above sea level. Okay, so that's what our maps are based on. And the reason they're based on that is, so that's the baseline. The state has since published, as you know, if you've seen on the Dropbox, another set of recommendations or projections, excuse me. And those projections are 2018 projections, and they were just released a couple months ago. For the 2050 number, there's very little deviation, meaning that, you know, we're getting closer and everyone's sort of zeroing in on the number, which you normally do. The state projects a 2.2 foot, and that's the 1 in 20% chance it's going to happen. But the 67% chance that what they're defining as likely is only 2.0 feet. So really that 2.2, 2.1, it doesn't really matter because that's the target. And so our mapping is dead on, I think, good enough for planning, in my view, long-term planning, with that 2050 number. We map it at 2.1. The state's saying it's likely to be 2.0. That's the likely number. Could be higher. Now, the longer-term number, there's more deviation, variation. We've mapped 5.7 based on the previous projection. The current projections are lower for the 1 in 20% chance. It's about 5.5, I think, or 5.2. I think it's 5.2 feet. But the 1% chance is 6.7 feet, much higher. And the background evaluation.
Chris, you've lost me in your numbers. Your 5% chance is 5.2% rise.
Right.
But your 1% is 6.7.
Right.
So, all right.
Yeah.
I had my numbers wrong. Inverse.
Okay, so that's right. So the projection they feel least confident about is much higher.
This is generally the numbers in this email, right?
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
The chart's
Thank
in your
you.
email.
Yeah, I'm referring to the email. Good. That cuts to the chase. So I'm reminding you about those numbers that I put in the email. I think it's important, and I'd like to probably have a technical memo that lays that out so it fits into the appendix of the plan. But what I didn't get into very much in that memo is that the report goes into a lot of detail about the methodologies of the projections and suggests that as they learn more, it's quite likely that the 2100 number is going to be much higher than the current forecasting methodologies arrive at. And so there's a sort of this hint of caution. Sure, you can map it at 5.7 feet, but we think we're going to be well over 6-7 feet because there's the control in emissions, even if it was controlled today, is not going to stop global warming. And the forces are moving forward. So their projections are indicating that it's going to be higher. So where the next round of projections are likely to suggest that in the out years, sea level rise will be higher than they're projecting here.
Chris, wasn't it more effective to say we've got a 95% chance that it won't rise 5.2% and a 99% chance that it won't rise 6.1%? Isn't that the better way to look at it?
No.
Why?
If you think about the 1% chance in the flood zone, it actually floods much more frequently within that flood zone over 100 years. Even though it's 1% a year, it's actually, I think.
That's a surge flood, isn't it?
Just regular
flood,
flood.
not a rise of the water.
Just regular floods, storms, or like the storm we had today, or tidal storms that come in. I have a hard time explaining the probabilities, but it's not necessarily the way you phrased it. There is, and that's a probabilistic projection. It's likely that it's going to happen, when it falls within that 67% range. It's less likely to happen on the outside, but it's still likely to happen. It's still going to happen.
I'm going back to my statistics courses. Right. What's the I had the phrase and I've just lost it. The confidence level. What is the confidence level of those numbers?
I don't know.
I'm sorry, I forgot to turn off my phone. I apologize.
Yeah.
I mean, I think another way to phrase that question, let's assume we don't really know a confidence level, is how recently were these numbers generated? Because my guess is the likelihood of increased net bad news is high. Like these were probably, if they're 5 or 10 years old, they're probably optimistic. There is no will for stabilization or following the Paris Agreement. So you might as well toss those numbers out. I mean, to me, it's a question of how recently these numbers were done.
You say 2018?
They were done in 2018, but
That's actually pretty recent
So
then.
in that
Chris,
table, the table that's in my email, those are the current forecasts.
so when we're looking at your maps, what are the things that we are considering? A, B, C, D options for certain areas.
Yeah.
Allow this, but require this. We could.
Yeah.
What are we considering for as far as action goes?
That's what I want to talk about tonight in the land use section. That gets right to it. But before we get there, I wanted to draw your attention to a map in the land use section.
Well, before you get to the land use section, there are a
Yeah.
number of recommendations in the environmental section that I think could be discussed before we get to the specifics of how we're going to address them. And I've written a couple pages here of notes, and so I won't read them all to you because that would take too long. But it seems to me that the section 4 envisions a lot of new regulatory responsibilities. A complete revision of the entire suite of regulations, standards, and specifications. I think that's a quote.
Mhm.
Assumption of the county stormwater management regulation, reinvigorating the Chesapeake Beach Board of Port Wardens, and immediate development of plans for vulnerability zones. I say immediate because we would stop development until we develop those plans. So
Right.
we would have to immediately address that. So that's a lot of work.
Right.
And considering we're 6 months, I would say, behind in our comprehensive plan, I'm not sure we have the manpower to address all of those in the short term.
Well, and yet they're all critically important. And they don't have to all be done right away. But clearly, some things are critically important, like actually empowering the Board of Port Wardens so they can actually review any further work on the.
Well, that's one of my
Documents.
one of my questions. Apparently, the Board of Port Wardens hasn't been active.
Even though the
So-
language is in the code, the ordinance that created them and all their standards is in the code.
Right.
What is this board?
Well, what could or should have been done in the last, say, 10 years by the Board of Port Wardens that hasn't been done or needed to be done, or what would make a difference? I'm confused about what they are and what they do.
Yeah, it's a board whose job is to review any structural changes that might affect navigation, bulkhead, or piers, or wharfs, or revetments. Any type of work that happens along the shoreline is a subject of their regulatory authority.
Isn't that within the exclusive purview of the Corps?
No, not exclusive. Of course, the Corps of Engineers has regulatory authority over it, and as does MDE. But there's a town layer of review as well.
So we can be more restrictive than the Corps, but not less restrictive.
Yeah, so, yeah, right. And the town may regulate things other than the Corps. The town may have a certain design in mind for these things, or might care more about navigation than the Corps might, the particulars of navigation, let's say, or where boats should park. But the way things are in town is that the property owners who seek to change the shoreline obtain approval through the MDE and the Corps of Engineers, and the town's not engaged in that discussion, which strikes me as being very troublesome moving forward in light of sea level rise.
So just trying to figure where this would have made a difference. Rod and Reel just talked about raising the level of their parking lot and putting a bulkhead, or I guess additional bulkheading along there. Is that the kind of thing that you're saying this board of port wardens would tackle, and not the Planning and Zoning Commission?
I think the Zoning Commission may deal with it in terms of site plan review, but the particulars of the design, the impacts, would be the Board of Port Wardens. Actually, the standards it's a chapter in the zoning ordinance. I think it's Article 8 in the zoning ordinance. It's all there, but it's never been, as far as I know, activated.
But do we, again, I don't know everybody in town, clearly. But I mean, do we have that level of expertise that we could make?
Are these volunteers that are on the board?
I believe
And
there are a couple members that have been appointed, but I don't know that for certain.
and can you point to in your opinion, an error or something that has happened that would push us towards reinvigorating this board? Some specific decision that somebody made that probably should have been different?
No. But you can imagine someone wishing now to increase the bulkhead higher, which will affect the town's ability to have a concerted approach to sea level rise. So now with the information we have, it seems incumbent upon us to have a plan that can be implemented by a board of port wardens or some agency that would actually review what's taking place on the edge of the water.
The Board of Port Wardens, would they input into the Planning and Zoning Commission for the comprehensive plan, for example, or how would that work?
I doubt it. I don't think they're organized.
No, well, I
But if
mean,
they existed,
If
If
they
they-
existed, they would input in the site plan approval process or for projects that don't even require site plans. We frequently get proposals to build piers, private piers. And you see up and down C Street, there's quite a few. They come to the town. All we do is forward them to the MDE and Corps of Engineers, assemble their comments, because the extent of our authority in terms of zoning is what's on the land proper. It doesn't extend beyond the land, but the Board of Port Wardens has that regulatory authority to deal with the length of a pier, for instance, or how tall it ought to be, or if it affects navigation, if it's too close to another pier. All those matters are beyond the zoning, planning, and purview.
So the town does not, an application for a pier on C Street, for example, which two were recently built within the last 2 years, that doesn't come through the town.
for
It
zoning.
goes to the town, through the town, but only for zoning. So all we have to do is check to make sure that the construction connecting the pier to the land doesn't create any critical area issues. But the actual construction and the height of it and the amount of coverage over the water, all these things are concerns of the Maryland Department of Environment and the Corps of Engineers. And they package up a very extensive set of approvals with multiple conditions, maybe 20, 30 conditions, and they send it back. And then we provide the permit to allow them to go forward. But our permit was really the permit to do the construction in the critical area.
See, coincidentally, I just built a pier in Holland Point,
Oh.
Anne Arundel County.
Right.
And my pier permit had to go through Anne Arundel County, and Anne Arundel set up the conditions, the size, the length, and all of that, over which I had to get a variance. So the county was involved in that, and actually the local community got a vote in it too, the Holland Point Citizens Association. But I'm reticent about adding more regulatory burdens on the local people.
Chris, a couple comments. Like what you're talking about just now is regulating riparian rights, which are rights attached to the fee owner of the shoreline. And that is a zoning issue, the riparian right. So why don't we not currently have that right under our zoning ordinance to fully regulate riparian rights?
I don't know.
And this goes with what Larry was saying is Anne Arundel County is apparently regulating their riparian rights.
I suspect the county does outside town limits if you're down in,
Well,
St.
but
Leonard or
a
somewhere
government- whether it's a governmental entity is
Right.
doing it, whether it's the town or the county,
Right.
but a governmental entity is regulating those. But the other point I was thinking of, you have a board of port wardens who are volunteers. They are charged with looking at whatever. They don't have the expertise, so they're going to analyze that. So they're going to look to staff for input into them and to make their recommendations. What's the difference between staff making a recommendation to the port wardens versus staff making recommendations to the planning commission on those same issues?
The way it's structured, it strikes me that the Board of Port Wardens, this is a whole separate set of regulations administered by essentially a separate board that's supposed to have expertise in navigation and water rights. So could it be rolled into the work of the Planning Commission? I suppose. You ask if the town regulates riparian rights kind of through zoning. In effect, it does, but it doesn't. I mean, it has the ability to through a body called the Board of Port Wardens. It's never been formulated or consolidated. So the regulations are in a separate body of the code that deals specifically with these issues of structures on the water's edge. I don't know more about it than that. I can't say more about it, and I don't know why the town has not ever used it, but in my experience, it's never been an issue.
would they then be involved in working with town, like, on all the dredging? When you talk about navigation stuff, is
Dredging
that
too.
a body that would exist
Right.
with respect to how the fishing creek is dredged?
Sure.
Because the town engineer primarily deals with that now in council. I mean, that's any discussions I've been listened to come through town council and town engineer in the public works
Right.
side of the navigable waters, if you will.
Right.
And there's never been a discussion about Board of Port Wardens that I know of in any of the dredge renewal contract stuff that I've listened to sitting out there. Yeah, I probably agree with Larry. I mean, it just seems, I'll tell you, so I went through the peer process and I felt it was a burden. But I appreciate the burden. Again, I don't think we want just people randomly going out doing stuff, but the MD, the guy who I talked to told me, he goes, you're going to pay a fee to MDE and Corps of Engineers, and they're going to come back and tell you 2 months later that you're in an archaeologically critical area and you need to pay additional money so that we can go do another study that we've done on the other 10 piers within a half mile of your property, which is fine. But they did. They came back with a packet, and it was submitted then to the county for the construction permit, so we could pull the construction permit just like you would if you were going to do an addition to your house or anything. And but it's not my personal feeling is there's a fair amount of oversight with anything in a critical area and the riparian right side and things like that, that I just can see this getting,
So is
you'd
the building?
shut down everything.
Is the building permit for one of these piers come to the town or to the county?
It comes to the town, but not for our review because the county administers the town's building code.
And so who would do the final inspection on the
The county,
dock?
And MDE. MDE will come out and do a final sign off that says you complied with all the elements that we told you to with respect to the number of square feet that you have at the end of the pier and the height of the water, and because they care about how much shade you cast on the water, and so there's a pretty strict dimensioning that happens with MDE that then gets, so they come out and send you a letter at the end of it, as well as the county doing their final inspection process from a construction permit side.
You're saying Calvert County would.
Yes. In addition to MDE, I wasn't there, but some lady came out and I got a letter in the mail from her saying they had completed their inspection process. So, personally, I feel like there's a fair amount of oversight, and it's not a quick process, and nor should it be. Again, I just think this body could be overwhelming in its ability to not get anything through.
So are you saying that we should have a board of?
I think it would be at a level of complexity that the town that we're not prepared to deal with.
Yeah, or another component of that is a level of responsibility that you sort of alluded to this, that we don't necessarily have people here who know more than the Corps and MDE, and I'm not sure what we add.
Right.
There's maybe a notion of, I'm not sure what we would add.
what if the town had a plan for addressing sea level rise, but a property owner decided to do their own thing and get it approved by the MDE? Now we have 2 or 3 different types of structures or approaches, so that you don't have a coordinated approach.
We won't
Water gets
review that in
around.
the zoning, in our initial zoning review of that. We wouldn't have any,
You wouldn't review it from.
no,
a
but you
zoning
would
standpoint.
as our.
No, I wouldn't. If they take
As
a
our
property
zoning
owner on
administrator.
at the end of Harbor Road, for instance, where sea level rise is becoming a real issue, and there's a convergence of the water and the wetlands. It's turning into marsh areas unsuitable for development and should never have been developed ever. So structure that. Now, someone comes in to MDE and seeks to build a seawall, and then to raise the land up to that seawall. Even though the plan has called for the reemergence of the wetlands, because the wetlands are going to provide the buffer to wave action and protect the town ultimately. So that's the type of coordinated approach. I think somebody needs to be able to administer in a very technical way over the next 50 years. We need to develop the capacity to deal with these issues.
Wouldn't that be covered in a site plan review?
Yeah, you would.
If it's a single property, you're saying we wouldn't have
Yeah.
And
And if
then
someone
the-
pulls a permit for a pier, you don't see it. If someone-
Would it also be covered in stormwater management?
Could be, maybe not. It depends
Maybe
on what they're doing. I just think that if we're going to get into protecting the town from flooding in light of sea level rise, we ought to have the tools to do it. And whether it's through an existing body that exists now that's already set up or through some other means, there ought to be some acknowledgement that the town is not prepared to deal with sea level rise right now.
I don't
We
think
can't
anybody
rely
here
on-
is suggesting that we don't become prepared for that. It's
Yeah.
just the mechanism, the organizational mechanism by which that occurs is what I'm hearing from the board.
In my
So I
mind,
guess the
ahead.
question is there something we can put in the comprehensive plan to direct projects like that towards planning and zoning so that it does go through a process since it doesn't now?
So that whenever there's a proposal to raise a bulkhead, it would come to the planning commission.
Right, so if we put in the plan, in the comprehensive plan, where I already see some bulkheads on your land use plan in there, as part of, if you were to put more or to designate areas differently, is there a clause we could put in the comprehensive plan that says this is the process, and directs that person to planning and zoning?
Sure, you could write it any way. You could be specific. I was specific, very clear about, and so the alternative approach is to lay out a more general understanding of we need to develop the capacity to regulate this, and we might best do it within the existing structure that we have, which involves the planning commission and staff or hired engineers coordinating with MDE to implement the overall plan. I mean, rather than empowering a separate board that hasn't really been functioning for long.
If I'm understanding where the flow of this conversation, and I put that at about 60% at the moment, that makes a lot more sense to me because it allays one of my concerns, which is it's tough enough to get interested volunteers out to do the kind of work that we do, and adding another board adds 5 or 6 or 7 more bodies that have to, be part of that. But it doesn't change the additional imposition that I think all of us have expressed. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we need to do that to deal with sea level rise, but it doesn't address what you guys are talking about. If you already feel that MDE and the Corps have oversight, we would be adding another layer of oversight. It's just a question of which body executes it. And I think we should be cognizant of that if we move forward with it. Chris making a pretty compelling argument that maybe we should, right? But we should be cognizant of that.
But it seems to me the town council has set up this board of port wardens. It exists. All the regulations are there, just waiting to be enforced. So we're kind of telling the town council, as the Brits would say, to suck eggs. That you get somebody appointed, get this thing going. So my question would be, where does their responsibility start and where does mine end? Some kind of line. I don't know where that line is because I didn't know about the Board of Port Wardens until today.
Let's say the Board of Port Wardens was in effect. You would approve a site plan, and one of your conditions of approval would be that the Board of Port Wardens approve the design of the bulkhead, that it was at elevation that was sufficient to deal with sea level rise and prevent waters from getting behind it or something.
We could do that now, right?
Yes.
We could refer it to the Board of Port
You
Wardens.
could, even though, yeah,
Doesn't exist.
right. Okay.
It
So that's
seems-
what I'm suggesting really is that let's get it going. Let's reassert this structure that exists.
It seems to me we're talking two different things here. We're talking comprehensive plan versus zoning ordinance. What we're doing now is a comprehensive plan, and we as a board can make a recommendation in a comprehensive plan to be submitted to the town council saying these items need to be addressed at some point in the zoning ordinance. Then when we get to redoing the zoning ordinance, we can get to the point of saying the zoning ordinance, all those regulations which are currently under the Port Wardens section, we can eliminate that section and reincorporate them into the planning commission if we so desire at that point. But in terms of comprehensive plan, I think our position ought to be that we recommend that some mechanism be in place in the zoning ordinance to implement protection for unified protection of for sea level rise.
I think I agree with you.
Yeah.
In that, if it were more general in nature, we could then spend some deliberative time thinking about whether we stick with the Board of Port Wardens or we amend some sort of zoning
That's a
ordinance.
zoning ordinance
But
decision.
I think the guiding discussion here would be there needs to be some additional oversight and review on these projects that have been under the purview of the Board of Port Wardens, but make it a little more general so we have some ability to craft what that body looks like. We could decide to bring, like you said, bring it in, or we could sit and, and when I come up in front of town council, say, I think, based on, and they're going to be reviewing this, this thing, and it could be the discussion with town council at that point of, hey, maybe we want to reinvigorate this thing and we're going to need your support to do that. Or, so I think there'll be some dialogue that happens with council, but I would feel more comfortable having that recommendation be more general in nature about the body of what that body is.
Yeah, just say that it is a recommendation that these issues be addressed in the zoning ordinance in some manner.
And again, I'm in favor of that. So that's splitting the difference or kicking the can down the road, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
But it is creating the potential to add oversight, which we have concerns about, and yet which Chris feels is pretty important. I yield to the expert on that and say, sounds like we kind of need to do that. And it doesn't have, that can be a light touch oversight in the absence of something that really requires oversight.
And I think when we're talking about a 20-year, 30-year plan, it's good to have that guidance that says, hey, as we get worse, we're going to need more involvement in review.
Yeah.
Because again, we're trying to look down the road, and there may not be a lot of projects that need it now, but if we're going to lay that roadmap of down the road, let's lay that out that, hey, when we do start seeing that sea rise, we have to have more involvement with whatever body that we decide it resides with.
Got it.
Does that help?
Yes.
I'd like to just
That's
refocus.
one out.
I'd like to refocus on something else that Larry alluded to, and that was the stormwater management and the interaction between the county and the town, not only in terms of stormwater management, but building permits and those type of issues. And one of the comments I sent to Chris, and I'm not sure everybody got that, was, does that make sense? That has a lot of impact from both a fiscal and an organizational impact on the town. And the question we have to wrestle with is, what is the cost benefit of doing that? It's going to be a cost to the town of personnel. It's going to be a cost to the town of organizational stuff, organization of their staff and their time, versus continuing in some manner the coordination with the county. And I understand there's been some disagreements, there's been some friction between the county and the town on those issues as to who is responsible for what and who does the reporting to whom. We had this discussion a year and a half ago about check off on final subdivision plats of how do you coordinate between the two. So that's an issue that I think we need to talk about is, do we want to address that, or how do we address that? The second real big fiscal issue that I raised to Chris is with respect to the sea level rise and its impact on the wastewater treatment plant and the fire department. If in fact the sea level does rise and floods those areas, that's going to be a huge fiscal impact to the town in terms of either bulkheading those facilities or moving those facilities. And that's going to be a huge dollar amount that the town council and the mayor need to be aware of and begin in their fiscal planning, their long-term planning. How are they going to address that? Because there's going to be, a multi-million-dollar expense in doing all of that stuff. And we need to make sure that they're aware of that. And I'm sure they are aware of that.
Who funds the volunteer fire department? I don't know if you know.
It's volunteer fundraising plus the town and the county and the North Town and North Beach, I think all provide some funding. I remember.
For the facilities and the equipment,
And the
Yes.
operation, yes.
I knew the operation.
And I think the equipment, because I saw something where the county just funded some kind of a new squad vehicle for the fire department. So I just wasn't sure. We will have some input and some percentage of that cost will be allocated to us, I assume, if it ever got to some point. No, I don't know. I don't know.
So,
We get a grant from the town of Chesapeake Beach. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
no, go ahead, please
From the
do.
town of Chesapeake Beach, the fire hall gets a grant.
Okay.
And that grant can vary from year to year. And normally we request that they tell specifically what they're going to do with that grant.
Okay.
So when they bought a new piece of fire equipment, we knew exactly what it's going to.
Right.
I'm talking more about the capital expense.
Okay.
Because when that wastewater treatment plant floods,
Yeah.
that is a
Town
huge
shut down.
number
Yeah.
that we're gonna, and if the town doesn't have reserves for that or some way of funding it, when we flush our toilets, they're not gonna work.
So isn't that an instance where the comprehensive plan can help? Because,
Sure.
if we identify the type of project that we want there, or or that we want a project there, that automatically gives us the ability to apply for grants for, and, there's the planning grants, there's the construction grants. But I think we have to put it in there in order for it to go up the chain of grant funding to get that.
Certainly supports the grant funding by having it.
So would we recommend that within the next however many years, we, at least research, professionally plan a project to,
But I don't know whether you saw Chris's response to my comments on this, and his response was essentially that would be addressed in the local government section of the comprehensive plan. And I assume the addressing of that issue would be something to the effect that the town should be aware of the potential following costs and should be taking the following actions or should be planning to take a fiscally responsible position with respect to these potential issues.
okay.
I think that's critical from my perspective. When I first read that, I said, oh, dollar signs just floated in the air in front of my eyes.
Right, I mean, at some point, we will have to spend money on things, otherwise.
Oh,
But
we-
that's
we
pretty
will.
well, if
Yeah.
the map, the wastewater treatment plant's pretty well protected for,
Yeah, yeah. So I've interviewed John Castro, the operator there, and the town engineer. And, the wastewater treatment plant was just upgraded and expanded a couple of
Right.
years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. And they assure me that was built at an elevation that can continue to operate through the foreseeable future and that it's not an issue for them. If you actually look at it, it does sit on a little atoll in that surround of area. So it is up on a higher elevation and
May not be
presumably
able to
most
get
of the
to it.
that's what I was gonna say,
operation.
the harder part is to get to it.
Right, yeah, that's
That's
exactly,
where
that
the
was my
co-
comment. Well, how
That's
you-
where the cost is gonna be, is to get there.
Brilliant point. And they said, I believe Mr. Castro said, we understand that a number of our critical operational pieces will need to be elevated over time when the time is right. But the plant itself is
Survivable.
on solid ground. But yes, everyone recognizes that access would be an issue, as will at the fire department.
Yeah.
And I don't know if can be as confident about the fire department as I can be about the wastewater treatment plant. And in the land use section, I do acknowledge that and recommend some initial changes that we ought to be thinking about, to Bob's point.
In the natural environment section, I think you say Route 261 does not flood in your time frame we're talking about? Does or does not?
It floods, it'll still flood, but
Well, it
won't-
was elevated about
But-
10, 12 years ago.
right. It won't be inundated by sea level rise. Sea level will still rise, but not at that level. It will still flood over it. During Isabel, for instance, it flooded out here in front of the town hall. And of course, it'll flood further north.
But that's storm surge. You're saying the normal tidal range, it won't flood.
That's right. And if you saw that the highway is not shown in the immediate or the 2050 forecast to be underwater, but it is shown to be
2100.
underwater in 2100 when there's a 5.7 foot increase. If that comes to pass, if it comes to pass, that road would be underwater and would need to be elevated again. And
It's a state road.
yes.
So what sort of coordination do we have with State Highway with respect to these issues? Or do we have any coordination with them?
I understand that North Beach is engaged with the State Highway Administration now, and SHA understands that 261 is a key evacuation route. And I haven't coordinated anything or spoken with SHA, but it is something that we ought to do. And in fact, we're required to, as part of our state laws, to send our drafts to the State Highway Administration, all the various operational agencies, so they can
Well,
offer comments.
there's a difference between the way Chesapeake Beach and North Beach interacts with State Highway. North Beach has taken some level of control over 261 through North Beach. Chesapeake Beach has not, either 260 or 261. And so North Beach can add crosswalks and do other things on the roads that we potentially can't, because we don't have that authority. And it seems to me when we get to a transportation section that we ought to be looking at giving for our pedestrian traffic and walkability studies and all of those other things. We need more control over the access across these roads, which could include more authority over raising roads and that sort of thing. The only road that North Beach is raising right now is the one at the north end of 261, which is under a lot of controversy right now.
Is that still in the state jurisdiction?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a
Yes.
state highway project.
Yeah, the state is talking about, I'm involved in that. The state is talking about raising the road 3 feet. And they aren't going to widen it. In fact, they're going to make the lanes, at least across the little bridge, narrower, 8 feet wide instead of 10. They call that traffic calming anyway. And they're going to close the road for 5 months so that the fire department has to go all the way around Boyd's Turn to get to Holland Point. It's a mess. But in any case, I had a conversation with the mayor in North Beach a couple months ago about the roads and what they had done. I want to meet with them again to get a little more definition of what they've done and what options that gives them to try and mirror it over to here.
Again, maybe we could have a section in transportation, like Larry said, that encourages more frequent and direct communication with State Highway.
Just a red flag, along with more control in the
Cost.
MOU, you have more of a fiscal impact.
Right.
If the Chesapeake Beach wants control of 260 or 261, we're going to have also the impact of maintaining 260 and 261, which carries a fiscal impact.
Which is why I was thinking, maybe we write some statement about more dialogue, and that gives us the framework of we may enter into the dialogue and decide, ooh, that's not the road we want to go down, but we can at least express our desire to engage in more conversation with them.
A little trickier for us in North Beach, I think, and Larry, maybe you're more plugged into this, but the only section that North Beach controls is really the area right in the town center, right? They don't control all the way out to the causeway. Because the state's essentially paying to raise the road
That's
out.
correct. The state is raising the road.
So they only really.
They're only, and I'm really sketchy on this. They're only partially responsible for 261 through North Beach.
Like
There's not a
First Street
complete
to
shift
Ninth
of
or something.
responsibility. And I don't know where that ends, where it starts, so something to look further into.
Can we go back to one of Bob's comments about stormwater management and stuff? I guess it's not clear to me when the way that's written, what you envision the greater town role being.
And,
Or did you write that, is it intended to be somewhat vague so it could be discussed and worked through dialogue with the county?
Well,
Okay.
there is a pretty, I think, strong statement in here. We question whether the arrangement is still in the town's best interest. So
the
we need
nature
to
of
know what
how-
our questions are.
clearly, I think there is a need for a change. In fact, this just came up today where the town has opted to require a public works agreement for grading, which is under the jurisdiction of the county. But the town had experience with this particular developer and wanted to ensure better inspections of grading. So it is double bonding. In other words, a developer has to put letters of credit up for both the county and the town, so it gives the town leverage. That is not something that's listed in any of our subdivision regs. We don't bond for things, but we're sort of stepping out of our bounds in order to protect the public's interest here in the town. And we've had many examples of where these mass grading projects have resulted in less than ideal compaction, and the backyards, side yards of houses have just sloughed right off, which becomes ultimately a town concern because the phone call is made to the mayor and council. And, you know, the town has infrastructure under some of these grades, which become an issue for the town. So this has been an item that has been discussed in front of the town council numerous times. And it was a number of years ago, we made a big push under the previous mayor to coordinate with the county. There's only so much coordination you can get to because there's so much interplay between the various plans. The stormwater management plan should actually be reviewed by the town conceptually anyway before it even goes to the county for approval. But it doesn't, because the town doesn't deal with that. So there's just the town has reached the level, I think. We're at population of 6,000. We're increasingly developing environmentally sensitive areas. There are a lot of reasons why it's time now to develop the local expertise in-house. Now, I don't know if that just means that there's just a greater interaction. Maybe the county brings an engineer that's staffed in the town hall that works just on that, or if the town just adopts stormwater management manual. I mean, it's the same basic manual that every jurisdiction in Maryland applies. Everyone tweaks it a little bit and administers and interprets it different based on their own conditions. So a rural county is going to interpret stormwater management under rural guidelines. They're not going to develop the expertise with curb and gutter and stormwater management pipes and drainage and how to grow and develop in an area where water tables are high and stormwater has to flow beyond a seawall back. So I just would suggest that the town consider developing the expertise in-house.
So the way I read this, the responsibility is it's being recommended that the responsibility shift from the county to the town for stormwater management.
Yes.
But an alternative would be the town could develop whatever expertise it wanted and impose its own level of review before it goes to the county. Is that not correct?
I suppose
Well,
that's a
or
possibility.
alternatively, if it shifts from the county to the town, do resources come from the county to the town to do this oversight?
I don't know.
Chris, help me understand the problem. And you put it in the context of you were saying that side yards or backyards slough away. Using that as the example, is it that the county has different compaction rules that the town or the county is not enforcing their compaction rules? Or is it, I'm confused as to where the conflict arises.
The town doesn't have compaction rules. It doesn't administer grading standards. It relies on the county to administer the code and inspect.
So when the county inspects it, are you, can we infer that the inspection was not appropriate and it should have failed and the county passed it? Or are we saying that the county regulations are not strong enough?
And I don't know the answer to that question, but I know that the town, in response to these instances, under the guidance of the council, has required third-party inspections. Even though the county inspects it, we're now paying, well, through the developer, we're administering a third-party inspection on top of the county's inspection to ensure that these issues don't happen in the future.
And I think it was on some of these larger developments is really where a lot of this has happened, where, you know, the homeowners association got, so but again, while it was installed and, you know, they haven't completely turned over the entire development, there's this struggle of who's maintaining some of those clean outs, who's you know, what's happening. Are we getting a lot of debris and stuff left in large stormwater pipes that then never really, because it was phase 2 of 8, it never really gets gone back and the whole system is inspected and accepted. And then at some point that all transitions to town infrastructure at the end of the project. And then the town is left holding some bills that probably that the town feels should have been addressed by the developer and not been accepted by the county inspection process. I think Jay and them have worked hard from the public works side of being on site when the county is doing a lot of those on-site inspections, especially up here at whatever that development's called, the Highlands is Heritage, and it was an H. So I think there's been more direct involvement in discussion, even over here at the Rod and Reel, you know, with when county's coming out to do that, that Public Works has been much more actively engaged in that inspection process with the county. I'll be honest, I would be uncomfortable. I think if the town were to take on that inspection process itself, I think it's a big bite, and I don't think that's where we want to go. I think we want to encourage coordination and cooperation, and maybe being that witness to some of the towns, you know, ask the county to say, hey, when you're coming up to inspect stuff in our jurisdiction, we'd like some advance notification so maybe we could tag along if we want to be there and, you know, and oversee that. But I think I personally would not want to see the town. I think there's a huge bill that comes with it. I think, again, it's the county building codes that were, you know, they issue the construction permits, the grading permits and all of that. And I think, me personally, I would like to see that continue to reside with the county, but it's important that we maintain a strong relationship with the county in that process.
So are you suggesting that we don't have the oversight that we currently have?
No, I think we
Keep that oversight.
Yeah, I think we have that oversight. Well, we don't. I think there's a desire by some to take over the entire inspection and permitting process, and I think that's a reach too far. And I don't think we as a town want to do that, or I wouldn't recommend that from a planning body. I think we're better off staying in the zoning lane from a permitting process and letting the county administer the construction and inspection and acceptance part of those projects.
Well,
And Chris has a good relationship of, you know, now the county doesn't issue the UNO until somebody from the town has signed off on stuff. And again, this stuff that has improved from but there's still a lot of bad feelings and stuff that has lingered from, you know, some of the developments 20 years ago and 15 years and that are still finishing up the final build outs.
We aren't the only ones in the county that have hills and rock slides and estuaries and wetlands and those things. So if the county's code is inadequate, isn't meeting the requirements, isn't satisfactorily doing the job, maybe we need to get the county to upgrade their game.
I mean, I think and I think that's the discussion that Jay and town engineer continue to have with the county is you need to do a better job of your inspection services, whether you do it in-house, whether you contract it out or however they do those. I think it's the frequency and the quality of some of those inspections and how long some of these developments took to go from phase 1 to phase 8 and be fully built out. And that stuff transitioned over to the town for ownership and maintenance. My perception. I don't know, Chris.
Apart from what the planning commission does, I will continue to recommend to the town council that they move forward in this direction, apart as a professional obligation. And we are in fact doing that at the staff level. So I would think that this may be best to be stricken entirely than to water it down so much as you're
Do
suggesting.
you think we should be taking over inspection?
Yeah.
Do you really?
Yeah.
It's,
Yes.
let me go back to the difference between what the comprehensive plan ought to be doing, and that is planning for the future on that. We're not here to implement any contracts with the county or agreements with the
Right.
county. So in the comprehensive plan, we need to make sure that we've raised the issue saying that appropriate inspections, coordination, or appropriate inspection and enforcement of be accomplished, whether in-house or not. But we raise the issue and maybe what Chris put into his letter saying it is a concern for us is appropriate because we as a body don't have any fiscal control of whether the county hires staff to do this or contracts with the county to do it. That's beyond our purview.
We can't have the town hire people either.
We just had a developer install a 12-inch culvert under a driveway parallel to it or within the drainage ditch on a road here on 30th Street, and a 4-inch pipe under the walkway that came from the house to the street. You know, if the town were engaged in that, the developer would have done what was required and wouldn't have required the town to go back and either force the developer to change something according to the plan or to remove that section out of the ditch. So that's just one small example of what happens continually. Of course, there's the big projects, but there's also the day-to-day. You know, we're thinking about how to make the town more walkable. That means neighborhoods that have been cottage neighborhoods with open section streets may become more curb and gutter with sidewalks and drainage issues, real drainage issues that need to be managed continually from every development. It has to match up with the specs. That doesn't work when we rely on expertise somewhere else, far removed, in my view. So I'm just thinking about preparing the town for the expectations that the current council has about the quality of development, and stepping up our game a bit on that regulatory side of infrastructure. And this comes through experience in coordinating with our engineering and public works staff.
Okay.
That's all.
If stormwater management is not being adequately addressed and the county's responsible for it, our comprehensive plan goes to the county for approval. We need to note in there that we're unhappy, that it's not adequate what's going on in some way. And
Yeah,
if
right. And I don't mean to suggest that my colleagues there were unhappy with their level of service. The reality is they're just distinct jurisdictions, different timelines, different development scenarios. you know, it's certainly, and they're very busy themselves with a very big county. But maybe what I'll do is just redraft this to soften it, to acknowledge the problem and to suggest that changes would be beneficial in light of the changes that we want to make in terms of environmental benefits. And this is the natural resources section. Without, you know, because I don't think there's unanimity on the planning commission right now for the opinion that there ought to be a change. But I mean, we can do that, or we can just strike it out altogether. Right?
I'm okay with it in. I felt like you were saying, let's take over all the, take it all in house, and I'm not sure
I'm
I'm
not-
prepared to.
And I'm not,
Go there.
and I don't know if
County
that's the right
anyways?
strategy, but
That's it.
It would still have to go to county or no?
if the town had, like some other communities do, its own stormwater management regulations, where it adopted the state stormwater management regulations, just like the county adopted,
Right?
it would administer it. It would go out and review the
Completely,
projects.
and it would never go to the county.
Right.
And I think I'm more comfortable on stormwater management side than I am on the overall construction process.
Oh, I'm not suggesting building permits.
Okay.
And,
Well, when you get grading can be. I'd take another.
We can
shot
keep
at
the grading scenario as is and still develop a stormwater management plan, correct?
we're going to have a development that will come before, proposal likely come before the planning commission. Will call for a mass grading of forest and steep slopes. We won't be involved in regulating the extent of that mass grading, except to say, it looks like you're grading too many steep slopes. I think the town would probably benefit from having a little more control about where lands are graded and how steeply they're left and how they're inspected. And, that's
All right.
So
Where
let-
might this development application be for?
Yeah, on an open land in the town, on some of the remaining open space in the town. It's far from coming to you, but we've seen concepts, and these things are. We have to have tools. And we have to have assurance that they can be administered effectively.
Wind back a second to the distinction that Robert keeps making, which is that this is a plan. This is a plan for the future, and it's a set of recommendations that the council can choose what they want out of it. So what I'm hearing from Chris is that there is going to be a need, an increasing need, to provide us with these tools, and that the recommendation for us is to be able to take control of these things. What I'm hearing from us, and I'm one that has said this, is we're nervous about taking these on today. And I think, again, I yield to Chris because he knows he's done this, right? But I yield to sort of think the plan should be stronger then. The plan should be stronger in what it recommends, knowing that between today and the recommendation, there's going to be a lot that happens. Maybe we do feel that we need to ramp up the implementation of how we handle stormwater management, and maybe, God forbid, developers pay additional fees for that to cover the costs so the town can do it. I mean, it's a long way out, but it sounds like as a planning stage, comprehensive plan, we should be as strong as Chris is indicating. So I think I'm moving towards supporting that side of it. That makes sense, Chris?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. And there is always this balance about being more specific and more general. And I feel that the things we feel concerned about ought to be specifically stated. But I also acknowledge that I've not done a good job preparing you to evaluate this independently, except to write this paragraph. And, you've caught on the conversations over the time, but the other planning commission members haven't. And so it's hard in this venue to give a specific recommendation, because when you adopt it, it's like, it's you as a board. It's not me handing it off. So you have to feel assured. If there's doubt in your mind, I think softening the language, making a general statement, or striking it out altogether, because I'd like for for your yes to mean yes, your no to mean no, period. And I don't want you wishy-washy about things. And but I just thought that this was an important signal to the council that in order, and this is in the natural resources section for a reason, because we have to show how we're going to protect steep slopes as an example.
And I think the protecting steep slopes part is important. I don't disagree there. And I mean,
Would it be more appropriate to put it in the local government section to, as part of the comprehensive plan, to say something to the effect that it's our recommendation that the town council take all appropriate action to preserve or to enforce stormwater management, grading permits, building permits,
what are the visions?
something to that effect. Tell them that this is a planning tool saying this is an issue, and we, as a plan, you, the fiscal authority, have to take an action to adequately enforce these things.
Yes, and it can actually be in the implementation chapter, which was the final
Right.
chapter that talks about how you implement the vision of the plan.
Right.
Yeah,
You
sure.
know, you could, and including, or you could put in there alternatives, bring it in-house, revise our agreement with the county or something like that. But as a plan, we as a body recognize that this is an issue, and we recommend to the town council that they take appropriate action to do this. And then they can analyze the cost benefit of each of those alternatives.
Right.
Maybe leave a softer general statement in the natural resource, because you're still dealing with the natural resource aspect of steep slopes grading, stormwater management, which affects water quality and all that stuff. And so, you give it a soft touch in there, and then you have some specific recommendations and suggestions in the town government or the implementation section.
Well, would
Don't be
the,
silent on it in the natural
Yeah,
don't be silent on it in the natural resource, because it's important to protect that resource.
would the implementation section essentially say that the Planning and Zoning Commission would start regulating storm water management?
No,
Who would then?
I think the implementation section would just lay out what Bob said. It's a
Well,
concern.
who would manage this new function if it were adopted by the town? Wouldn't be the town
Well, if-
council, would it?
No, it would be the town administrator,
Okay.
either through a contract with the town engineer, or bringing in a town engineer on staff, or working out some
Contracting
other-
with the county, or
Yeah, or a structure with the county. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to go back to a word that Chris, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm new. But it seems like we're being overly vague, and that the town council is not going to have enough time to think about all this stuff if we give them a entire comprehensive plan full of very, very vague recommendations.
Right.
Like, I feel like we're not deciding anything. And I feel like we should make some decisive recommendations, because it's not our authority to adopt them, but I feel like we should make some recommendations. Like, would we, I mean, I personally would not want to give up oversight on grading. I've had an experience with county inspecting something that was not at all accurate, and I appreciate that the town has taken on that responsibility. And there's things that I think that, it's our town, it's the town's people. I think there are things that we should take responsibility for. Protecting our natural resources is one of them, and every time I hear about a new development and I don't know where it's going, I wonder who is going to protect what most people in the town love. And so if we don't have any recommendations in our comprehensive plan, I don't know that anybody is protecting the grading issues. If it's so ambiguous, nobody holds that ball. And I think that we should put some of the ball in comprehensive plan this time.
For the sake of moving on, maybe I could just take a draft to try to balance perspectives and send it back to the planning commission to review and email me. I think I got, we need to clarify the issue better, which gets to the specific issues. And I think give the benefit of the doubt to the council to select various alternatives that they feel would work administratively. And on those areas that we know in our gut and there's clear, definitive commitment to a certain path, certainly I think we should state it. Go out, even if it means going out on a limb and saying, we've got to, council, you got to come with us on this point. We're going to argue it. But on those areas that really are administrative, and this is administrative, clearly, maybe we should open up the options rather than being the definitive voice on any one, but make it clear that it's an issue. It's no doubt about it. You okay with that? Yeah. Moving forward. I'm glad we talked about that particular issue.
Chris, could I ask a couple of questions?
Yes.
The section on wetlands is and their importance to the environment in general and the flora and fauna and creatures around is pretty compelling. It talks about growth of the wetlands,
Yes.
which I thought there isn't a lot of room for growth around the current wetlands, but nonetheless, in these studies that you've looked at, we have so many acres of wetlands today. You talked about them being open water in 50 years. How many acres can you make a guesstimate or an estimate of how many acres of wetlands we have today as opposed to how many acres we would have if no action were taken to stop the open water migration of these wetlands?
I could figure that out. Could scale it out. Wouldn't be very difficult to come up with a rough number, but I haven't done that yet. But it's fairly substantial, just within this bowl that's carved out here in the.
Well, where I'm going with it
Yeah.
is in the north set of wetlands. We have the Seagate there. It's possible, expensive, but it would be possible to fence that off and keep those wetlands as they are by pumping the water out over time. So I don't know whether that's environmentally required or desired, or but it's all affected by the amount of wetlands that is left if we just let it go unopposed. Anyway, that's just a thought. You talked about water supply on page 10. I wondered, and it was very brief, it talks about the aquifer and that we pump water from 500 feet down. But you also mention in there, let me go back. I wondered if we shouldn't talk about water conservation in the town and conservation of our water resources as the population expands, demands on the water increase. There are all kinds of ways to address that, from the extreme, which the Europeans are talking about, where they have gray water and fresh water systems, separate systems in every residence. But one of the things I've read about recently is in-home fire sprinklers. Okay, in a fire, according to the National Fire Protection Association, homes that have sprinkler systems use 1/10 of the water that you would use if the fire department came and pumped it out of the fire hydrant, which could be significant if you had a lot of fires. But the other thing it does is it reduces the civilian death rate and the average firefighter injury rate 81% by having in-house sprinklers.
Right.
I'm not sure what our requirement is for new homes here for sprinkler systems. I know in Anne Arundel County, everybody has to have them.
Right.
But it seems to me, we had, I think it was in North Beach recently, we had a fire where some fellow died in the fire smoking or something. But the other thing the National Fire Protection Association says is that by having a sprinkler system, the fire is confined 97% of the time to the room where it starts and doesn't spread through the rest of the house. So for safety, it's a interesting thing. But I wondered if we shouldn't encourage homes to install sprinkler systems when they're renovations. I don't know how you do that, but it seemed like might be something we should encourage.
It does save lives, no doubt about it. I believe state law requires that sprinklers be installed in new public assembly buildings, offices, and multifamily housing. And I believe it allows jurisdictions to decide whether they will go into single family residences. And candidly, I don't know if Chesapeake Beach has that requirement. If you've adopted a requirement, yeah, for single family homes, yeah.
I thought it was state law that all new homes had to have sprinklers.
Right. Maybe about
I know in Anne Arundel County, it's required in every home, new
I thought
homes.
that was part of the building code.
maybe
I don't think Calvert's adopted it yet.
that provision of the code. Yeah. I just don't know, but I'll check into it.
At least 10 years ago, it was an option.
It's an option, right?
I haven't read anything about people retrofitting homes, and we have a lot of older homes here, which could be termed fire hazards. But it would seem to me that would be useful for a lot of our older homes too, if it's possible, even to retrofit.
And the other proposed solution is to have smoke detectors tied together and hardwired with battery backup. So if it detects smoke in the basement, everybody upstairs in the bedroom is alerted.
That is a requirement now. I mean, that
Thinking
that
of
is a
the alarms
requirement.
on the sprinklers.
If you do a certain size addition, you have to go back and retrofit all of you do.
Well, according to this National Fire Protection Association, the fire alarms save people 18% of the time, whereas sprinklers would save people 80% of the time. So it's a significant
So
difference.
only 18% of the time?
That's what it said. Or 18% of the people, I have to get the numbers right, but that's, they were using 18 versus 80. Another question I had is on page 16, you talked briefly about septic field vulnerability from sea level rise.
Right.
You know how many septic systems, or I don't know how you would quantify them, but what we have in the way of Chesapeake Beach and septic systems?
Don has that number. I don't know what it is.
I would like to see us adopt an objective of eliminating all septic systems within Chesapeake Beach. I don't know if anybody else agrees with me, but the threat to groundwater from septic systems, and as you point out in this national environment section, sea level rise affects the whole operation of those systems. And since that's a major focus and concern, I know one of the council members is very interested in doing that, and I'd like to see that as one of the objectives. How you do that is is difficult. I understand.
It is, but we certainly have capacity for it in the wastewater treatment plant. The only question is the cost to extend along roads and through easements, and the stormwater management manual that was just adopted, right? Just adopted, requires connections when the pipe runs, is it 500 feet or 200 feet? The number was going back and forth among staff and the council for a while, but so whenever the town installs a pipe within a certain distance from the house connection, you have to connect. So there is some regulatory power there to do that, but that doesn't mean that the town is necessarily proactively extending pipes around. But when it does, it's
Well, I know the homeowner has to pay a significant portion of that cost, and there are some arrangements where the homeowner gets subsidized or somehow help in getting onto the municipal sewer. And I need to look into more of that and how that could be done. But it seems to me that would be a loosely defined objective, if you will.
for 20 years. I think
like
that's a
that
nice
it is
objective, actually.
Defined. Realize it.
You like planning commission like that idea? Make specifying it as an objective of, which is clear, means the town council adopts it, needs to find a way to do it.
Not every objective is met, unfortunately.
Well, at
No,
least then there's a yes or
Yeah.
no. We don't go around in circles talking about.
Something else that we've talked about before, and it's obliquely related to this because it involves storm, hurricanes, and hazard mitigation in those events. I told you I visited Chrisfield about 6 or 8 weeks ago. I followed up on that. Chrisfield in Hurricane Sandy was flooded, a lot of damage. Chrisfield, I think, is about half the size, population-wise, of Chesapeake Beach. So it's a smaller community. The town did not have the capacity to assist the residents. And so what they did was they formed a long-term recovery private organization, because residents, doesn't matter where you are, here or there, cannot individually go to the state and federal government for assistance. It has to be a government agency or an agency, I guess, applying. And so they had to form this private volunteer organization, which was staffed by volunteer residents, representatives from nonprofit and faith-based organizations, municipal, county, and state agency representatives. They worked primarily with the Maryland Emergency Management Agency, MEMA, and through that, they are able to assist homeowners with raising their homes above the floodplain with 75% of the cost. The homeowner pays 25%, and through these grants and these agencies, they get assistance for 75%. That's pretty significant. It seems to me that before the storm is better to prepare than after the storm. And we should look into setting up facilities, not facilities, but organizing for a storm in advance, and how we could manage assistance for the residents after the storm.
I think that's a great idea. That's brilliant. The county makes use of that fund when it raises dwelling units, where it encourages property owners to do the same thing. And yet I didn't mention it in this. I think it's a worthwhile thing to mention.
And I guess while I'm on a roll, I read most of the county's comprehensive plan. I've got 2.5 pages of notes here. I won't bore you with reading them, but there's one paragraph that I thought we should plagiarize, titled "The Chesapeake Bay Crossing Study," and I'll just read it as it comes out of the county's comprehensive plan. But as of 2018, the state of Maryland is conducting a Chesapeake Bay Crossing study led by the Maryland Transportation Authority of the Maryland Department of Transportation. The study will result in the identification of a preferred corridor alternate to address congestion at Chesapeake Bay Bridge and evaluation of its financial feasibility. The Bay Crossing study will evaluate current and future traffic demand across the Chesapeake Bay. The county comprehensive plan goes on to say that locating a bay crossing in Calvert County would result in a tremendous amount of pass-through traffic on Maryland 4. Constructing a bay crossing in Calvert would likely have a significant impact on the county's rural character. If Calvert were to be chosen as the location for the next Chesapeake Bay Bridge crossing, then the county's long-range plans, the comprehensive plan and transportation plan, would need to be redone to address the significant potential impacts. That might be something we would want to throw into our comprehensive plan.
Along those lines, I would probably look to the mayors and town council sent a letter as well back maybe 6-7 months ago. And so and they crafted some language with the attorney and everybody, and you might, there may, where that talks about Route 4 and some stuff, I like the ending part of that. There may be some front stuff that addresses the beach a little more in particular, but a combination of those two things would be worthwhile and beneficial.
We could talk about the impact on 60, a major artery.
Yeah. So, but I know the mayor and all the council members endorsed that letter. It was signed by everybody. So I would look to that letter as well.
Okay.
On your roll, Larry, are you?
Oh, that I'm done. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any? Cindy, you've been quiet tonight.
Well, I've been a little concerned that we're getting into details that maybe we don't have enough knowledge, or I don't have enough information up to really make some really intelligent decisions or recommendations. So I guess I'm a little concerned about saying too much. I do want us to look at, when you go into sensitive areas, at the beach area. I think we need to address the idea of having some kind of a restoration program down the road, which I think we're going to have, and some kind of a retention and restoration program for the beach. I think that should be in there. I also am wondering if we don't want to add, I was pretty involved in my last town by the Pacific Ocean with a lot of, we had to develop laws that would encourage proper behavior and how to deal with the bay and the shoreline. And I'm just wondering if we want to put something in there about, if we ended up having laws like you couldn't even wash your car in your driveway kind of a law because it all drained down to the bay. So my question is, when I came here 7 years ago, I was really concerned that we really didn't have a real good structure on how to protect the bay. And I think we need to implement something like that in the next 20 years to do our part in protecting the bay. I don't think we've really done much. I could be wrong, but I don't think we've done much. I think we need to implement, or at least put in here that we need to implement something like that. Those are a couple things that I would like to recommend.
Very good. Now, I do recall you saying that the beach replenishment maintenance is really
That's
important
really,
at Brownies
it's really
Beach.
pretty, yeah, that's gonna be, especially with the sea level rise, we've got some real issues with that little beach of ours. Yeah.
So everything that I have been taught from like say taking a business class perspective is that the comprehensive plan is used for so many things. I already mentioned grants, but also from like an entrepreneurial perspective, what's in that comprehensive plan is then used for that entrepreneur to go get a loan, to go, it's part of what is in a business loan package. And different, city studies. I mean, this is, hobby related. I'm no professional, but I have noticed that other towns and cities have actually created a comprehensive plan that was a plan of action, a plan of something that you're working towards as a future result. And so I guess I just don't understand. Within each section, you're giving us a lot of knowledge and overview of different subjects. I can't see how it's coming together to create a plan of action. And so I'm just wondering, are we going to develop objectives? How are we going to develop objectives? How are we going to, if we're talking about Cynthia mentioned, or the transportation questions that who's going to take the next step of actually committing to making ourselves intelligent enough about that to have a recommendation? I don't know. I get that you don't want to constrain things to the point where you're telling to a level that stifles much. But I think with no plan, you get exactly what the result of no plan is, which isn't necessarily something. Because I think in that scenario, either things get overlooked because they're too hard to address, or they're too complicated, or nobody really knows, so it doesn't get addressed. Or something that you don't want comes in and takes the place of the vacuum that didn't plan. So when I joined this committee, I was kind of hoping that we were going to put forth a vision and a plan that is actionable and not just ideas. So I was just wondering, are we, for example, for this natural environment, what here tonight studying this, it's all good knowledge, and Chris, you're a wonderful writer. I wish you could write everything that I had to write. I just wonder, for tonight, what are our objectives? What do we want to come away with tonight for the comprehensive plan?
See, on page 18, the list of objectives. That's not sufficient for the
Okay,
resource
so
natural environment.
protect growth, creating natural environment. Okay, so I guess So to me, these are like one level up of what I expected, or maybe 2 or 3 levels up. So when we say, as bay water levels rise, we will make way for natural migration of the town's marshes and wetlands so that development and land conservation are balanced. I guess what I was wondering is how do we get to the how? Like, you know, you can say you're going to do a lot, but like there's a lot of areas that touch wetlands here.
So then you we look at the recommendations that support that type of plan objective. And recommendations will be both in this chapter and in the other chapters. So this objective could have said, we will build a seawall and other structural elements to protect the town in perpetuity. I mean, it could have said that, but it didn't say
Right.
that. It said we're going to allow some little balance.
Mhm.
So it made a decision, right? And then the land use chapter builds on things we've talked about now for months about places where the town is not going to invest or even encourage the construction of seawalls, like at the end of Harbor Road, where wetlands are coming in already, or even near the volunteer fire company, something we need to talk about tonight. But and the wetland emergence area where the wetlands are emerging and migrating into some residential areas and commercial areas, that is continuing because the water under the ground is wet, and so the phragmites are
Right.
growing, and there's no stopping that.
I remember
So-
talking about that last time.
Yeah.
I feel like we didn't really come up with a recommendation that we let that go natural.
Well-
Like I feel like we never got to the recommendation.
Yes, as a key option, except that we're not, first of all, this is a comprehensive plan, but the key element here is this a general plan. It can't be specific. We can't look at what's best for every given parcel. We can't incorporate the interest of every citizen or property
Right.
owner. We have to provide the overall policies for the town. And that's why this is recommending that we do detailed master plans for the areas most threatened by sea level rise at some point in the future, hopefully nearer than further.
So that's my answer.
Yeah.
We're recommending that master planning goes
Yeah, so
here.
we can work out these
invest as a
details and
town.
with fairness and equity among the property owners rather than kind of suggesting now at this point. So that master
Sure.
plan would be done under your direction, and you would have that much more detailed type of give and take and mapping lines.
So that does answer my question.
Okay.
That we would be pointing to areas where we would want as of X, Y, Z. Is
Yes,
that correct?
absolutely.
Okay, that clears a lot up. Thank you.
Right. Right.
And I do think, and I think this is the framework or that vision piece with some objectives, but I think that project level stuff starts happening, like developers, you know, people who have interest in the town will if you give them that framework, they understand a little bit of where the direction the town wants to go, and that's where some of that starts to build, and we don't lay out what we think all those projects are in this document is kind of how I thought this, you know, where we would end up. You know, these are like guiding principle kind of things of where we want to go. And so somebody comes in, they say, you know, I want to build a 10-story thing. And then they read our thing and they're like, well, shoot, that town there's not a place for that in that town. That's not what the vision of the town. It's not going to work. I got to go find me somewhere else. You know, or some guy reads it and says, hey, there's a need, there's a desire for walkability in small stores, you know, and so then some guy's putting on his brain thinking about how can I take advantage of some of the things of what they're trying to do and where might, you know, but then like you said, having that master plan that we work on over the next couple of years is where, again, we can kind of bring that along a little farther to help those, you know.
Am I right also in saying that there's also a sort of a lines of authority question? You know, our objectives and our recommendations come at a certain level. The nuts and bolts of that involve possibly changing zoning. Those are things we have the authority to recommend but not do.
Yeah, we are we're here for the town council to purview all this and then come back and say, okay, let's work on this part, or let's, agendize this and we'll work on that. So I think after this is approved, then the town council will then let us know, where do we come back and do the details then of each different section. So this is the big picture. And
Right.
optimistically, this is the
Well, they
big
will.
picture.
And still
Hopefully they
meeting
will.
the state requirements. I mean, Chris has some specific state requirements in that the comprehensive plan has to address, like with very defined elements that some of these sections have to have to meet state requirements for the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, our objective.
So there is some
for
fluff,
each
huh?
section, we, as a town, not just our body, like obviously with the
Right.
council, especially because they're the elected officials, I just feel like we should be aiming toward something a little bit more concrete, I guess.
Okay.
Don't go too far away, because,
Right.
there is a vision statement that's pretty detailed. And I hope that when this is done, we can point to
Right.
specific things that are drawn from that vision statement. So far, so good.
Yeah.
And in fact, I've struggled a lot trying to meet some of the visions. And that's one thing I would hope to talk with you about tonight, is that particular vision about a town center. It's an issue. But there was also visions about affordable housing and creating more commercial space and all that. So in the land use section, we're showing how we can achieve those objectives. If the vision wasn't about creating a more vibrant commercial area, that we want to be a suburban residential community, which is a perfectly valid objective or goal. You can certainly adopt that, and we could develop a plan for that. But we didn't. So, there is clearly a direction that comes from that vision statement that the Planning Commission approved. So I think you're on the right track. We're headed the right way. This is not going to be just a general broad policy statement that says nothing.
No, I
that
know.
sort of
I'm-
makes everybody happy. I think it,
No, I'm not wording it correctly. I guess I'm just. Because everything I've read points you to the the comprehensive plan for guidance for your validation that you can get a project done for your, and
so if you're, say you want to move into a town and start a business,
right,
you look at comprehensive plan, this is a pro-growth town. They're showing areas for commercial development, and they've got policies that say work with developers to be flexible in the regulations to bring about intense development. You might say, well, that's the kind of place I want to locate in because the lots around here don't have parking. So I suspect they'll forgive the parking requirements in order to get me into this property. And then they'll look to the zoning ordinance and say, well, sure enough, there's a way to vary the parking regulations. So I'm going to go after that parcel. And that's how it actually happens in practice. Those are the conversations we have. So I think that's how an entrepreneur, a real estate developer looks at a comprehensive plan and says, does it embrace what I think the market supports, what I'm willing to invest in?
and then also there's the component town input. I tried to look back up what the survey results were.
It's in the vision document.
Results of the survey.
Specific references to it. We even have pictures in here of the meetings that we had. I didn't realize they were in
I
here.
did look at the Dropbox
Yeah.
for that.
That's kind of cool.
Well, I'll get those results to you, the survey responses.
But I mean, you reference
found
them in
it.
here.
Are they on the Dropbox?
Yeah, I like I said, I'm new. I'm trying to understand. I'll be honest, last time, back to land use, last time I saw a lot of apartments and I didn't understand like what the objective was for putting so much density allowance. I guess
You read those slides to suggest that
That's how I
that
read,
area
yeah.
would be densely populated, whereas I read the slides to suggest that while the current regulations allow this type of development, we want to make sure that the types of buildings match those that are compatible with residential development. So this, and
It's a
then I went and
different
calculated what was reasonable build out, what would be reasonable over the next 20 years. And, but the land use chapter, we'll get into that in more
Okay,
specifics.
I'll be
Definitely.
quiet. I'll try to absorb and not speak for a little while.
No, we want your input.
Oh.
Not
Yeah.
that we don't want your input at all.
No. Thank you. I'm just trying to understand.
And I appreciate all the questions and comments because, again, as I said at the beginning, I really don't want to be sitting there reading about us in the
Right.
Calvert Recorder or whatever the heck the paper is, or the Baynet or something, because I really hope that we've had hard discussions and talked through this and then we're comfortable with it so that we can defend and explain and articulate why we think this is a good document when we put this out there for the public comment period. And again, it's not going to be perfect. We're surely going to get comments, but I think by having this deliberation and these discussions, it helps us all when we get to that product, because I really don't want to be sitting in a room with 300 people for 4 hours, having them just crucify us.
Loud and clear message. I hope we.
So, all right, is there, Chris, you want to talk about, are we going to talk about land use or what?
Yeah, let's
or what do
get
we-
into that a little bit, and that'll wrap up the evening. And then I'll make the changes to the natural resources thing. Of course, it's not final, and if you can please send me your comments or circulate them continually on that chapter. When next time we convene, I could show you what changes are made.
Chris, just and on that point, when you go back to revise that, could you do it in a format that would show deletions and insertions?
Yes. Track changes or something.
Yes. So I can track it.
I just have one more question. On this slope, I know you've talked about the slope here by the Brownies Beach, going down on B Street there. I guess what are your recommendations? I know we're not talking about recommendations really, but I'm going to go back to that section a little bit. I'm a little concerned about the fact that we aren't addressing that a little bit more directly. I'm trying to go back. What page is that on? Why did I lose it?
Like page 9, maybe?
Yeah, there you go. Steep slopes in general. I'm concerned that that particular area is extremely sensitive and it should have a more direct approach to ongoing evaluation. And I think we have got to get in there and do a little bit more work on that. I think there's going to be a lot more slippage if we don't do so. So I just think we need to put that. I don't even know how to put that in, or how to address that in here. But you understand what I'm talking about, because we've talked about that before.
Well, there's there's a couple elements of that.
Yeah.
We talked about both, first on the stormwater management.
Stormwater management, yeah.
We've opted to not apply the stormwater management manual. We're going around the county because it's not in the interest of people who live on that slope to allow water to percolate into the ground as it goes into the slope. So we're conveying all the water off of those lots into town storm drains and conveying it to the bay, because we think on balance, public safety is more important than pollutant water quality on that limited block.
Here.
So that's that's sort of the fundamental shift. Now, we're doing that independent of the county's review, and they've given us leeway to do it. There's that going on. It's ongoing. It's every time someone comes in and do something now, they're connecting to a storm drain.
Right.
And we've changed the way we review development proposals there.
Okay.
So it's not business as usual. It's show a storm drain plan. Go back to the old days where you convey your water to a downspout and right out to the street. That's how it works now. There's the other part is how much is too much for building on these little lots. I kind of think that a lot of those lots, or most of them, have been built on or redeveloped recently, over the past 10 years or so. But it's not to say that there won't be another wave of building. And I don't know if before you were on the board, Cindy, the Board of Appeals sent a message through me to the Planning Commission saying to the Planning Commission, you guys have got to do something. Stop sending us these proposals. People are seeking variances. And they didn't want to have to review and approve variances to allow bigger development. They wanted clear-cut rules that said you can't cover these lots anymore. They were sick about having to approve these things. So I think that's the other element of that, the land use element. We've had people build swimming pools on, just feet away from 50% cliff,
Yeah,
which in retrospect should never have been done.
No, never.
So would you like to develop?
I think we need to have some
language that
language.
addresses
We definitely
both
have
of
to have
those?
some language in here that addresses that area of slope. And that whole stretch, it's gonna slip again, and it's just a matter of time. And if we don't put something in here to address ongoing evaluation and maintenance somehow, we've got to. I don't know how to word that, but
Got it. So on page 18 of the land use chapter, wanted to show something to you. It's an
You
exhibit.
said page
Page,
page 18.
I'm sorry, page 19 of the land use chapter. You see that? There's a graphic there. You might recognize that. That's the environmental features map that's in the comprehensive plan that the town adopted in 2002. So, and that's actually been in the plan for a number of years now. You see the extent of the blue on this map? That's the floodplain that FEMA had identified before its more sophisticated mapping using LIDAR and other techniques to pinpoint where elevations were. What they did was basically identify a floodplain that's contained within embankments, within steep slopes, essentially. And if you know anything about where we are today, just to our outside to the north here, you see the land slopes up to the houses on the street. And then that slope carries around all the way over to Richfield Station, where Richfield Station comes down. And then on the other side, Harbor Road slopes down to the water, but on the south side of Harbor Road, it slopes up very steeply again. So the geology forms this bowl, which is opened up to the sea, to the bay. And the Fishing Creek, the river, comes through. And this is the natural floodplain of the creek, which covers everything that's out here all the way down to Harbor Road. All of Kellum's Field, the gas station here, all of it. So this was the recommendation in our plan was back then was, let's be real careful about any development in the floodplain. Now this FEMA's come out with a much more fine-tuned floodplain, which is more accurate. But is it more accurate when we're thinking about long-range planning and sea level rise? Ultimately, sea level rise will fill up the void that's been created by nature. And this really corresponds to what I think we're going to get from Salisbury University. They're doing mapping for us that show what the storm surge would be on top of the higher sea level rise. This flooding will be greater in the future. And I think it's going to be contained within this geology, this structure we have, not geology, geologic features. Anyway, that's why I'm hesitant about thinking long-term about creating what we've called a town center right here. with commercial and residential. And so I've been rethinking that a little bit and thinking how to create maybe a smaller, more intimate town center that is better connected to what the pier idea could be, Veterans Memorial Pier, which is connected to that concept plan we saw about redeveloping the corner here and so maybe the town center is just outside of this blue area, which is really where we are here tonight to Maryland 260. So literally we have a road here that's very overbuilt for the 12 houses it serves. It's certainly a great development lot. You can see that could be a business there next to that something like that project we saw last year. That a couple of houses are located behind us before you get to a townhouse community up there. It's conceivable that they could be redeveloped for something a little more dense to create sort of this town center, which is on the edge. And then everything out there retains its central use now as a recreational center. It really is recreational, allows the floods to come in, everything dries out and people emerge again to play, whatever. But it takes the development potential out of the area that is subject to harm. And you might say, well, why do we care? We can always build in the flood zones, and that's what the regulations allow building. You just have to elevate your structures. The thing is that all this land out here is built on fill. It's all made land. It's built on this great wetland that used to be here. So that is problematic when you imagine water percolating up, groundwater. And I do remember the town engineer talking about how long it took the rod and reel to hit any solid ground and how much water came out of the holes. They were,
They
What's
probably
the
never
word?
hit rock. They're probably just friction piles over there.
maybe it
I don't think-
it took them
I don't think
forever
they hit
before they
bedrock.
sort
They're
of
probably
got to
on,
a point where they were
hit
satisfied.
They hit resistance.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I don't think they ever get to bedrock on those with
So-
the lengths they were driving over there.
That's
On the
obviously
parking lot,
built
you
on-
mean?
Yeah.
And I think the fill that took place here is more recent. The courtyards at Fishing Creek, maybe I think they're 25 years old or so, built on a wetland. The water park, built on the wetland. The Northeast Community Center, built on the wetland. The marina, it's all wetland. And so one principle that's universal in everything I read, all the plans that have been done with that around the country, all the federal agencies that advise about this say, stormwater water will rise to fill the areas that have been made, the areas that have been reclaimed from the ocean. And that's in fact the case. And that's why to fix it, you have to fill it again, to elevate it up, or to do rather expensive construction.
But so there's a side benefit to this, Chris, if I'm understanding what you're saying, which is that earlier we talked about these two possible, I don't know if we use the term redevelopment, but sort of more commercial focused districts. The hill south on 261 and then on 260 where there's commercial already. This would then be right up against that. So the town center is now right up against this possible commercial. I'm hesitant to use the word dense because I know that's a sensitive word, but some level of sort of increased density would be more compact, would be in a smaller area of square miles where it's all right up against each
It
other.
really becomes a town center that encompasses that major
Yeah.
intersection, ties it together.
And it puts the town hall right smack in the center of it, which if you look at some neat little small towns, we were just in Cambridge, Chestertown over the weekend. And there's events that are around the town hall. You know, the town participates in them, encourages them, and we do that here with some of the Christmas events and so on, et cetera. So I think that's a neat. I think that's an improvement over what our first draft was.
It also means that there's less opportunity for residential development because the amount of land that's available is shrunken considerably. If you turn to page, maybe I'll just pull this slide up because it'll be easier for the folks here. sections on page 24, 24. So just, this is, again, just concepts. And you can see the town hall is the blue square there. This idea of the circle used to be right here. It sort of shifted. There's the town hall right there. Here's Tyler's. Here. And this band is really the line that defines where the ultimate sea level is. And we're beyond
that-
which it's protected. We're protected beyond this.
Is that effectively where the slope starts going up?
Yeah, yeah. And starts at some pace, not just gradual. And you don't have to, you can go outside, you see how the road goes up. That's part of that's the side of the hill. And there's Charlie's sort of the connection piece.
What would the land
So
use
this-
be there?
This idea of sort of landscape design might be appropriate for this type of area then. Since it will flood, it needs to, not only just, it should look nice, it should be amenity, it should be an extension of the town's trail system and add recreational value, amenity, and maybe a regional destination with an attraction that fits into the town's tourism economy. But, this is certainly big enough to house a couple nice shops, a restaurant with outdoor seating, a cafe. That's certainly, you just go outside and actually, like I did today, walk around the space. It begins to feel right. And maybe maybe it's right sized given all the environmental issues. That's not to say that development couldn't happen here, unless you say no deal, no dice. But the thing is that most of this land is owned publicly. The county owns a big share of it, the town owns a big share of it, and the housing authority entity owns a big share of this. What's not owned, and of course the county owns the Northeast Community Center grounds and the water park grounds. And the town owns a parcel that leads to the boat ramp. What's not owned is this very narrow piece that leaves the harbor. That's owned by Rod and Reel. So there's this one private entity. Everything else is owned publicly. So except for the two businesses out here, right on gas station, and
There's
Everything east
Restaurant,
of
traders,
261.
traders. So there's three property owners, private property. Everything else is public. So that's advantageous. There's not a lot of fragmentation. People have to work together.
Who owns the water park property?
The land,
Is it really?
the water park in and of itself is owned by
Really? I did not know that.
same way they own party colors.
Do the Kellums piece. I didn't know that.
So who owns
It's a housing.
it? Sold by someone.
It's probably an LLC.
I think
set
it's
up
two
there.
ownerships actually. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
County GIS.
I didn't know that. Oh, well, okay. In any case, I do think that, as I mentioned in the land use section, that the town needs to be prepared to work with people that will be impacted sea level rise to move to suitable locations for the long term, because that's not viable there anymore. It's simply not. But it's not the only community that's not viable in the long term. But that is a much more foreseeable future that sea level and flooding will impact that area. So anyway, I wanted to make sure I got that out to you before tonight was over. I guess as I was saying, if development were to take place there, private development, then I think it would have to be something like, I think it's important to look at different alternatives. It would have to be something more akin to these images we've seen before, where development still takes place, but it takes place in the concept of the overall environmental design where enough capacity is designed to accommodate the waters as they rise and fall and to hold back flooding. And which is, conceivable, but it's expensive. And there has to be a lot of density to justify that major development scenario. And of course, all the land is mostly publicly owned too, so it would be transferring public land to the private sector to bring about something like this. There would have to be a public-private partnership.
So the town could actually take this property where town hall is located, redevelop it, make it into the 3 or 4 story, either put the town hall in the center of it and put commercial on the bottom, put the parking at the very bottom, maybe put city hall temporarily into where the library is going to be leaving, or just, hold city hall at some other location temporarily. But, as I said, this is what we did in our town, and the commercial part of it paid for the city, paid for other venues. I mean, it was an amazing way to benefit, because we ended up renting out everything and making a lot of money off of all the extra income, of course. And of course, you do, as we were talking about, you make it mixed use. But this, as much as I love this little town hall, I think this is not the best and highest use of this property. Now, especially seeing this and understanding that this is going to be where we need to develop if we're going to develop anything safely for the next 100 years.
Can you go back, Chris, to the previous slide? So if you execute on Cindy's idea, then that blue dot, really everything there becomes
All that becomes
a little
Yeah,
town center
development
that with
town
the
center.
town hall at its heart. Right? That's
And
it.
then
That's just
the
a
parking
great idea.
underneath would then benefit the pier people. The people would use the pier, so you have to do underground parking under here as well.
Is that the pier, Cindy, or is that the Second Bay
pier-
Bridge landing?
Very funny.
So what
I've got
if,
that pier all designed in my head here. But anyway,
what if we just allowed mixed use in that area? Kept it as it was? And, I mean, not forcing additional density on it. And just did some things to make somebody want to create a business. Now you're allowing it.
One's forcing
I-
anything on anybody.
Right, I know. I'm
Owners don't
just
have to
wondering
change
how
the
we're
land.
going to get to reconstruction. Like how
But you don't-
does that happen?
The
Right.
market conditions drive it. I mean,
Right.
we don't force it.
Right. So I guess my thing is, sorry, I said
Can't
I'd be
force it.
quiet, but I can't help myself.
yeah.
I just feel like if we really hit the recreational assets hard and added like one like stellar event to Chesapeake Beach, like a Christmas market or something else, a fish fest, whatever, then people would naturally redevelop in that area because they're allowed to open their mom and pop. Like I don't know that having a town center requires a big town building. Like I think it just needs to be and happen in place. There's already structures there. If we were allowed to make, to allow mixed use and then create more uses within our town for recreation, I think that there would be that ma or that pop that would say, you know what? I see people on bikes, people walking all over the place. I'm going to open up a cafe or whatever. We have the huge charter fishing industry. I think, as that grows, people will say, there's so much to do here. Now people want to stay, they want to ride their bikes, they want to, I don't know, look at the cliffs, and they want to charter fish. So they want to spend 3 days here instead of 2. I'm going to open up a B&B with a bakery in it. I guess that's what I envision our first town center to be. Like maybe like as we grow, it becomes something bigger with bigger structures. I just think that's a huge jump to go from where we're at now to big structures.
But again, the
I think it takes
comprehensive,
it takes
the
time.
the comprehensive plan isn't going to dictate
Right, but
redoing town hall as a 3-story building.
no, I know,
It's just
but
it's just the potential of
right,
the recommendation of the town center, of the possible updates to zoning rules being pushed up onto the hill and away from what would now become, help me with the term, Chris, resource conservation.
Yes.
Just,
right.
it's just the shifting of that, and it creates all these opportunities.
No, I like
Beyond that, I don't think we're specifying anything, unless I misread.
what would be specified is how many units you allow in all of this, but you know what I mean? Like that's what the zoning ordinance is. So it's telling you, hey, you can have 12 units because this building can be this high. It's got this dense, like it is doing that.
This is suggested land use and housing type.
And are they in the comprehensive plan or you suggesting?
Yeah,
They're in the map budget?
yeah. Do you want to jump into that right now? Because that will help answer Lori's.
Yeah, sure.
No?
Yeah, I said sure.
You didn't say it very
It's been a long day. I lost my enthusiasm about at 5:30 when I got on the bus.
Yeah.
Compatible with the desired location, with the proposed location. So what this map indicates is where different housing types can go. And so areas that are just shown as one, we don't allow single family housing. By the way, areas where there are no changes, we just left blank. But right now, you can have multi-family housing, apartment buildings and everything in the residential village zone. So this plan would say no more. Those uses are not going to be allowed in those districts. But there can be a more variety of uses allowed in this area and in the yellow area. So in this area, housing type 1, which is single family detached, 2 townhouses, all the way through to number 8, which is a 4-story building, would be allowed up there. So it's a variety of housing types. There's townhouse development there already.
Those townhouses are 4 stories up there,
That's
No.
aren't they?
Rock, yeah, I thought you
Yeah.
On Cox Road? I think they're.
Or-
rock something,
Yeah, Rockwell.
Rockwell.
Are they 3 story?
3-story townhouses.
Okay, I wasn't. I was thinking.
This area, which is now developable as residential village, would be resource conservation, so there'd be no development.
And that's to help protect steep slope stuff.
Right. which
To
is-
go back to some of what we talked about earlier, that helps address some of your concern of overdeveloping on a steep slope that we then have long-term slippage issues.
And then
The suggested property that you're talking about was gonna
suggested development.
be? Yeah. You said there was some plan that was in the starting.
Okay, so that would, right, oh, no, the subdivision, little subdivision, no, that's elsewhere. But we talked about this concept and the property owner here came to talk to the town about it a year and a half ago. That showed, I think, a 3-story, maybe even 4-story kind of building that kind of leveled off into the grade with parking and a cafe and apartments above to get a little view of the water. And that is what that is meant to show, red. So everything that's red here. Of course, this little diagram
On the
there
old plan.
before I wrestled with this sea level issue. But number 10 here, Councilwoman, residential above commercial. So you see there's offices or retail and then residential above. So this sort of scale to coastal community seemed appropriate for that location and here as you came down 260, so that we can create some synergies in business economic development relatively close to where the recreational resources were in the town and satisfy the need to provide additional rental housing opportunities in the community. Now, yellow is number 1, which would be single family. Number 3, duplexes or something like this, through 8. So up to this level. And right now, that's what's allowed today. Those uses are allowed today. But what's been holding them back is the restrictions on density within those zones doesn't make it viable to actually make use. You'd have to consolidate so much land that it would just be a one big parking lot in a building, which would be a very suburban model rather than a kind of intact town model. So to bring this about, we would specify the housing types. And then at some point, the zoning ordinance would have to be amended to allow for flexibility in the number of units per square foot of property area, so that you can have a variety of densities like this.
I think we talked about maybe when you get into that zoning piece, you describe it differently than number of units per square foot. And there were some other, that missing middle housing had some other ways you could craft the zoning to have a little bit different. It broke that tie between dwelling units and square foot size of a lot. And I think we're gonna have to explore that. I think that's an area where we gotta look a little bit more. I agree. I like the mixed use with some small residential above. I'm not, not 6 stories above there or 5 stories.
You can
or
do
anything.
that through height restrictions.
Yeah,
It
yeah, and-
controls the density.
And I think there's some ways. I mean, I think that's really appropriate. And I think that gets that make them more economically viable for that redevelopment. Because I think we all agree, those commercial lots have just sat idle they've been unsuccessful for the 20 years I've been living here. But I think if we shift from dwelling unit per square foot when we're talking about how we allow those housing types, I think we could get there. I think we got to change that narrative a little bit.
And I'm also suggesting in the body of the land use section that the bonus density overlay district be eliminated from the town. Right now, that allows for density to go up pretty high, and it also allows for, in a broader area of town, and also allows for buildings to go from 50 feet in commercial zones to 70 feet. So that would be eliminated, and 50 foot would be the max. And in fact, you could even come up with standards that would reduce that in certain areas so it steps down. Stuff that we should think about at some point, maybe not now, but to reference those ideas. And then building, so the building height and the bonus density overlay district would be eliminated. Instead, we come up with a concept plan that this is the acceptable place to allow development out of the flood zone and in combination with commercial development. So we're developing vibrancy to deliver the town center that people have asked for. And Laurie, this is half
I like
less
that a
than
lot
half
better
than what you
than
saw
last
last time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is one of the best. I mean, not this slide, because this is dated now, but this tweak, it's always bothered me that this notion of the town center, we had identified these 2 commercial areas and also a town, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to back you. And also the town center, and it never really made sense to me. Now it makes a lot more sense to me because it's really one contiguous area.
And I'll throw something else. I mean, again, I know, I'm a big fan of Tyler's, and I love it. We talk about a historic sign and all that stuff. Back when we had signage discussions 2 years ago or however long ago that was. We talked about the historic aspects of some of the places in town, but if you like it or you hate it, I mean, but down there at the wharf, they've done some things to kind of preserve, like Jesse White's, fish market down there and Captain Taylor's and some of those. And so even if we were to allow some, make some changes to that mixed use stuff down here in the corner, I think there's still a way to maybe preserve some of that heritage of the town when if somebody were to come in, and because I don't want to just scrap the kind of some of those iconic pieces that we have here. I mean, Tyler's has been here forever, but I think that we shouldn't let that shy us away from, in my opinion, of throwing that zone into the mix, because there are certainly there's elements and ways to preserve that into structures. So I'm throwing out there
And I think this whole subject is something that we should discuss more broadly with the people in the town. Because this is a big deal.
We will. We have to
I
have
mean,
public hearings.
Just, what, right, and I was at that meeting and nobody was happy. But, this is a big deal. We can't just put up a lot of structures without consulting people. Like, it would, I think that this in
Putting up
particular would
structures,
need a
there's-
lot of
It's really
vetting.
important that, if I may interrupt, and I'm sorry to say that, but I have to interrupt you sometimes because the planning
No, it's
commission, for
okay.
folks at home, no one's putting up structures. The planning commission is not putting up a structure. The town is not doing any development.
Right.
What it's doing is coming up with different design scenarios that would allow development to take place or not
Right.
in the future. Conservation in many places and development, in which many people would simply say real estate reinvestment or investment in real estate in certain areas, provided it provides a benefit to the community as a whole. And not without town approval, because every project comes through a public approval process after the fact.
And can I just add,
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to, tell me if I have this wrong, because I think this is an important point also, right, in sync with that. If we did nothing,
Right.
someone could come to the town tomorrow and put up a 90-foot
Yes, I agree. We
building
should definitely do something
on
about
some
that.
of the 70 foot building on some of the lots that we are going to recommend reducing that to 50. So really taking an entire story off. So there's a little bit of desire or recommendation in the plan to see some areas get some development or redevelopment, but in a controlled way, where currently today it's not controlled at all. We're only lucky or unlucky, however you want to look at it, that a lot of these places have not been able to catch the attraction of commercial developers.
And
So that's
Chris,
a point I want to make.
and I know you've taken my comments and taken everybody's comments, and I know there's a lot of comments, and I appreciate how you are trying to work through them. So I just want to say that because I can tell that you are trying to work through them.
I think the other thing that, we focus on some small key areas. I think you've taken, I do agree with the bonus density overlay has been a challenge, both when I've been on the board and off the board. And I've seen it create challenges in several different neighborhoods throughout town. So I think that helps. I think the other part, we're creating those little pockets, like where we're trying to talk about different housing types. I think, the other thing you hear when people get scared of redevelopment and we're moving everybody out because there's this big push going to come in and we're going to open it up to all kind of stuff. And I think this is a really measured approach that, we have a lot of senior citizens in town. And one of the things we said early on over there at the community center is, we don't ever want to create the feel that we're trying to find a way to retain the residents we have and create some space for the growth that, for the population that will come with. And we certainly don't want some of that population, if we started putting in more denser stuff back on the other side of 260 on the north side of that, I think we would get the feel of we're pushing people out, because you'd open up that whole area could be ripe for a lot more development. By retaining that as single family, I think you're kind of protecting the nature of that and providing that type of housing that we don't want to push people out of.
I would also suggest that, and it's not in this yet because I'm just not finished with it, I think. that there be a strong commitment to architectural design that brings about development that looks like it belongs in Chesapeake Beach, rather than anywhere. And, the town almost had a pretty massive project not far from you, Mr. Chairman, as I remember, that was allowed under the code as it stands now. And it could come back on any given Thursday or Wednesday that you meet.
Wednesday.
It's not on this map, but that would no longer be allowed. It's in areas likely to flood, number one. Number two, it's in a residential area and where single-family homes predominate. And we want to make sure that projects that deviate from that single-family home not be located in intact single-family neighborhoods, but be located closer to a town center. That's the gist of that. This is the area on the north side of the northern vulnerability zone. You see that the two parcels on 260 opposite 31st Street I showed as resource conservation based on your feedback for last time. So the use would be park or flood management. And we talked about the possibility of a transfer of development rights as one means to implement that recommendation. And then I highlighted in the North Beach Volunteer Fire Company. I'm suggesting that we think about a zoning category that reflects its long-term vulnerability, like resource conservation, so that that property is not sold to development, build right into an area that's really becoming.
So it could stay under that zone. It just couldn't be redeveloped once that use was gone.
It could be built again on that site, but it couldn't be expanded on that site. It could be moved on the site, but it couldn't be a housing project, or couldn't be a shopping center. Now, that area is really undergoing changes. You see this area here, which sort of looks like grass, is actually the same type of vegetation that's here. The phragmites are moving in. And so when you talk about wetland emergence and migration, that's what's happening all through here, back here into the townhouse community. That doesn't come about without a cost long term, in terms of the condition of the pavement and other infrastructure underneath. And so nature is sort of reclaiming some of these properties closest to the sea level line.
That little strip next to the fire department stays commercial.
North or south side?
The south side of the fire department.
Vito's is.
Oh,
Small shopping center.
Talk about that at all?
we haven't talked about that, and I think that's sort of where there are competing objectives in the plan to allow for commercial development and yet to try to extract development away from wetland
Resident.
areas.
Wow.
And it may be that, and sea level rise areas, that area will flood, its parking lot will be. In fact, if you look at that website I showed you in the environmental chapter, you see the images of the last hurricane, Isabel.
Oh yeah.
There's no way you can get into that parking lot. You probably remember. Yeah, completely flooded.
You go to the back.
Yeah.
But it's one of the limited commercial
No, it is. And I was just,
footprints we have in the town. So
what it made me think of it because you talked about we were going to, right term, but reevaluate the commercial zone up there by Neptune's, on the, at our northern boundary. But we didn't talk about that little strip, and I wasn't sure if there was a reason we were going to keep that commercial or think that's still appropriate for commercial, or because you're wiping it out up.
For mixed use, I think
Yeah.
you were right. Use.
when these properties redevelop, if they do in the future, they may have to redevelop on account of the flooding issues.
Right.
It'd be good for us, as I said, to have tools to regulate that and manage that development
Okay.
process, because things will be different. Conditions will be different in 10 years, 20 years than they are now. And we'll have to figure out an innovative way to do stormwater management.
But just based on that, it seems like it makes sense to to include that. I mean, it's right in the heart of what's going to be underwater. Why would you not categorize it as resource conservation so that, I mean, again, nothing's going to change today, but when those buildings need to be redeveloped or when they flood, then you have the opportunity to turn that into green space. And by then, just around the corner, we'll hopefully have some sort of a town center incubator going, and businesses can just move around the corner. Wouldn't hurt Lito's Pizza if they were in a new building that had a water view at the corner of 260 and 261, as an example. Is there a reason not to do that? Are we overextending?
I don't know. I probably would want to think about it.
I feel like it would be in our best interest to allow people to improve their property as much as possible as we go along.
Does resource
I think-
conservation prevent that for a shopping center?
But allow, when it would become a non-conforming use within a new zoning category. And the purpose of what you do when you signal, when you apply a new zoning classification, you signal that you want that property to eventually become consistent or compatible. So it would limit the amount of expansion that could take place. You could expand up to 50% under the current rules in the town for non-conforming business. That's why Maria's restaurant was able to, Mamma Mia's was able to expand because the code allows expansion of 50%, but no more. So they're at their maximum expansion. The same thing would apply here. So yeah, they could reinvest in the property and expand it somewhat, but no more than that 50%. What you're talking about, though, is more intellectually consistent, I would imagine, with the notion of protecting this area for, to allow the waters to be.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, if you look at that whole stretch from the wetland to the fire department to, the area we're talking about is directly abuts where the fire department plot to the south.
Yeah, it's true. It does.
If that were gone today, for whatever reason, what would we want to see there? We would not want to see more commercial there. It's bounded on the south side by residential.
Right.
So to me, your point's valid, but they would be able to maintain and improve their
Yeah,
property.
no, I
so
thought last
think
time we
that's
had
reasonable.
discussed that some certain residents couldn't redevelop.
That's to the north.
Yeah,
That's to the north
that's
of
up at the.
I think we should do what we can to at least let them improve their property.
Well, it's
while
own.
they're
It's
living there.
it's only commercial there though.
Right, so, but I think we were talking about if we made that mixed use, then they would be able to get, I don't remember the exact discussion.
We were talking about the lots to the north of the fire department. This is to the south of the fire department.
What I'm talking about
Right.
right now is to the south of the fire department with that, but this is also a valid topic, so I don't know.
Well, no, I don't want to horn in on your topic. That's what I thought we were talking about, but.
No, I'm
Let's
talking
finish our
about, I'm
topic.
talking about this, what I think is this plot. Yeah. I don't know,
So they
maybe
just,
we need to think about it, but it seems to me like a good idea.
so they can continue their use and expand up to 50% under what you're proposing.
Being suggested. If
under
you
what-
make it
yeah.
resource conservation, you can still do improvement to your burn. And if it washes away in a flood, you could rebuild it on the same footprint. And as a restaurant.
So all that designation to that property just prevents some
Other
grander
large
scale
development.
of a use.
But
Prevents them from selling it to someone who wants to then go put a bunch of apartments there.
Right.
And if it ever goes vacant and is inactive for, I think it's a year, maybe it's 6 months, then they can't reclaim the former use. They have to use the property to be consistent with the zoning category. So if it sits vacant for that period of time, they can't come in and open up another store.
What about something like Isabel? Because Isabel, there were homes that were uninhabitable for quite some time, more than 6 months.
Yeah.
Could they just come in and apply for a variance or some sort of, is there some allowance if there's
There is allowance,
something that's longer than 6 months?
yes, for residential,
Or commercial, I'm just using that as an example.
it will count of a major storm. Oh, yes, yes. Oh, yeah. If that period of time is they're shut down is because of repair and restoration, yes, of course.
They might not be able to start for 6 months.
Yes.
You know, like, they might not be able to change your number of drivers to this fellow used to live in a FEMA trailer for well over a year. And that's why I'm asking.
Yeah,
You know,
there is,
and I know we're talking about commercial.
would apply to commercial too.
And so really, the designation is almost symbolic in that sense, right?
Yes, yes. But it's not a bad symbolic designation.
Seems to me.
I think it also serves to make sure that the person that owns the building keeps it occupied, which is to our benefit. Right, because it can't go vacant.
It's a package too for certain situated properties to build flood mitigation measures on site as well. I mean, it could be there could be incentives that help cushion the blow, so to speak, but also move towards providing environmental benefits for the property owner and the neighborhood as well. So-
Have we, is there some other stuff you want to go over,
Wait,
Elaine?
do you want to talk about those buildings on the north end?
Right.
So yeah, there's commercial zoning up here. There's only one commercial use there. People want to invest in the property and they've come to get permits, and I've had to tell them that you can't build a single family home in a commercial zone. Or I told them, you're not conforming, you're capped at the 50%. And they say, I'd rather not invest in my property, or I'd rather not buy the property. And it's happened repeatedly here over the years. Well, we don't really have a mixed-use category except for the residential village, which allows for office in residential. So, I mean, so by lifting the commercial, we do allow essentially mixed use. We can do housing. The commercial is just commercial under the town's code. And also, the kind of vision is to cluster commercial in a number of smaller centers, like where we are here, and then on the hilltop, where there's been a sort of this little bit of commercial. So that's one objective as well. So
By the school.
this signals that when we do a master plan for this area, we need to look at this wetlands moving into this properties. And I've spoken with someone who owns, I think it's this property right here, and he said, yes, in the 20 years I've owned it, my backyard's become a wetland. And he's really concerned about his ability to sell it. He doesn't know what to do. He's renting it out right now. And I think he's interested in that buy-up program that Larry talked about that was funded through MEMA as an example. And that may be the approach to take these folks out of harm's way and still offer an approach to fairness and equity. You know. That's not meant to suggest that those houses go away. It's just showing that
Right.
this is what's happening, and that when a more detailed plan that involves people affected by it, they can see what's happening and come up with a response that makes sense for them.
We can we just have a quick public comment? It's on the agenda as item number 3. Is there any public comment tonight? If you would, come up and state your name and address.
Valerie Woodine, 8307 Bayside Road, Chesapeake Beach. These are just general comments. On the natural environment, you might want to look, I think you referenced Bayfront Park. Brownies Beach. I don't know if we need to call it Bayfront Park, although I hate that with a passion. I like Brownies Beach, but
In parentheses.
it's mentioned a few times. You might want to do a word search, quite a few times. I like Brownies because I'm an old timer. Next, I do think on the natural environment, again, these are just general comments. I think more attention could be paid to the jetties also, as you talk about water sea rise. as you talk about the expansion of the marshland and the effects that the town pays a fortune for dredging consistently, constantly. It's one of our largest continual expenses in many ways. Whether it's partial dredges or full dredges or removing the spoils from the spoil site. My only point is, I think that that should be addressed in some way, a little bit more than it currently is, specifically the jetties.
Can't hear you over here. when you're
I'm sorry, I
not talking.
apologize. I was talking about the jetties and how often we dredge or do partial dredges, full dredges. We do removal of the spoils from the spoil site. We refurbish the spoil site behind Kellum's Field. And just at your expense, I think in some ways, my goal is, I'd like us to consider having some sort of long-term plan or some recommendations, whatever they might be. Third is, I enjoyed your conversation about the inspections, third-party inspections, and closing that loop. And I think that's always been something that we missed is we have a plan approved here. It's inspected. You get your use and occupancy from the county. And I want to ensure that that loop is closed by the town, that what you all agreed to or what Chris has agreed to as a planning and zoning administrator is actually what was done. And I think that the more we can enforce that, the better. I'm not saying we want to take it over. I'm just saying that we want to ensure that that loop is closed to the satisfaction of whoever initially approved the plan. Whenever we have presentations, I would suggest, if at all possible, that we use, if we don't have one, we can use the county's GIS so that these maps can become alive and you can then zoom in and zoom out. And the county GIS is free of charge. And you can also put satellite imagery under it. And so you can just have it up. And I think when you can use a map to have a spatial context, I think it really helps. Next thing, if you were looking for something very specific, when it comes to the relocation of the fire company, one of the things you could either say that, we as a town ought to keep our eye out for the potential to purchase any property that might become available for use, if needed, for the fire company and things like that. That'd be a very specific recommendation. Not saying that we would do it, but at least it would keep us in our mind as a specific. You're looking for very specific recommendations. This leads into my sixth point, which is, I can assure you, having been on town council for 16 years, we've had BNR, which was biological nutrient removal at the wastewater treatment plant. Then we had ENR, which was enriched nutrient removal. I can guarantee you we'll have FNR, which is the next iteration. That current wastewater treatment plant has about a 25 to 30 year lifespan. So in about 20 years, we're going to have to start really thinking about what we want to do. Because that's a very expensive project. And if we're smart, we'll have long-term planning and we'll put money aside in that line item so that we're not hit with a large bond. My point here, much like with the fire company, if you want to suggest something, suggest that again, we start putting money aside for the wastewater treatment plant. You do risk mitigation by putting a little bit away for the fire company or some sort of mitigation there, some sort of risk. But know that I guess there's a potential that in our next iteration of the wastewater treatment plant, we might need to consider moving it. And then the question becomes where. And so in the next 20 years, we should keep our eye out for possibilities. On this map, I just had one question. You have the two green areas where Stennis Restaurant used to be. And it says that zone for resource conservation use for a park and flood management. Again, that could be a very specific recommendation that we try to purchase that from the current property owner. I would like to suggest that maybe one correction on your land use page 1. It says that, unless I'm unaware of something, I know we're redoing Beach Elementary School. It says the shared wastewater treatment plant, Beach Elementary School. Beach Elementary School is not shared per se. When we did redistricting, we pushed the boundaries of Beach Elementary School into the municipal boundaries to match it. So it used to have like Summer City and expand beyond our municipal boundaries during redistricting in order to have all the students that live in the municipality of Chesapeake Beach go to Beach Elementary. Those lines, those boundaries were brought in. And so no North Beach residents go to Beach Elementary. And so I would just change that because it's not a shared asset. Now they are redoing Beach Elementary School. At that time, I'm not sure if anything would change, but again, would have to go through a redistricting process. And I don't necessarily see that happening just because of the way the population is. And as you also talk, and I'm sorry, these were just things that I wrote down as we were going through it. When you talk about senior citizens, just remember that there's more people in Chesapeake Beach that are 5 and under than there are senior citizens.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think we kind of lose focus of that. Working for the U.S. Census Bureau, I'm cognizant of this fact. And so I just like to just remember, we have more 5 and under than senior citizens.
Yeah, I mean, Chris showed us some population statistics last month, and I was surprised how young the population was in the beach as compared to what I thought.
This is a young population. Not only that, but it's a transient population because of our large military contingent. And we need to keep that in mind that we have a certain level of population that turns over every 3 to 5 years as they transfer in and out. But we have a very young population, actually. And anyways, I think, by
It's
the way,
just the 5-year-olds don't come to the town council meetings when I see them, but the senior citizens do.
they're the old-fashioned silent majority. Also, I would like to commend you. I mean, being volunteers are not easy. I think y'all are doing a great job. Really, really wonderful. And it's great to see how much you interact with each other. And it's really cool. And it's this is probably the best planning and zoning board I've seen. And you guys are doing great.
Yeah, it's fine.
I'm not.
I wanted to make sure I got the public comment in
Yeah.
case
I'm not down with the land use.
they needed to go.
And going on that whole conversation of 5 and under, when you go on page 4 of the preliminary working draft, we talk about the lack of parks and the fact that we've just got this one little park right down here that's really a very minor park, and we don't have any more plans for any more active parks. We certainly have hiking, walking, trails, etc., but nothing for tots, anything like that. We need to add something that we need to either purchase or we need to find property that we can put more tot lots around.
Will the recreation equipment at beach be eligible? Like, is that, are residents allowed to use swings, whatever? I assume there's going to be some sort of recreation area at beach when they do the new beach. I mean, I know there's stuff up there now. Like, are we, if I had kids, could they go up and use those facilities when the new beach is there? Yeah, I didn't know about the next beach.
The tennis courts and
Yeah, I've done it.
But
but-
they're moving, and that's what bothers me, is that my tennis courts are leaving. And we won't have anything, pickleballs are now becoming popular. We have nothing like that active that we need to include in that somehow.
You can play pickleball
Yeah.
at the North
At
Beach Community Center.
Yes, that would be the most.
Available with the eye towards, what would you call it, youth activities or something? I don't know.
Yeah.
Public
Parks and-
use.
Parks and
or-
green,
Park-
yeah, parks and green space.
Parks and green space, exactly. And the other thing I'd like you to go to is on page 5. You start out under commercial land use. It says, the land that is devoted to commercial does not provide the array of services needed by town residents. Have we identified what those services that are needed? Have we identified those services? When I moved here, I was blown away at all the services and all the things that there are to do around here. So when you write this, I'm going, I think we have a lot for 6,000 people here in such a small area. So I almost want it to be a more positive focus on that paragraph than it's more like negative at this point. I'd rather it be more positive. We have all these things available. However, we could possibly, encourage more, in the service industry, more, coffee shops, whatever. But I think we need to bring out the fact that we do have a significant amount of commercial for the amount of population. At least that's my opinion. Am I wrong here? I mean, if I want clothing and whatnot, I will either go to Annapolis or I'll go online, usually online at this point in my life. But
One of the,
I think the way that people have changed and how they shop, it matters in the fact that I don't think we're really lacking as it's indicating here. I really don't. I think we have a lot more to offer here than we're seeing. Am I wrong,
One
Bob?
of the first presentations when I came on the board was just that point as to what local residents shop for locally and what we have to go for out of town. And that identified the types of commercial use that could migrate into the town and what was missing from the town. Chris, do you still have that presentation? I don't know whether you did that or Larry did
Yeah, I
that.
remember that. I remember that
Yeah.
very distinctly. And you talked about the notion of another grocery store and a couple other things that the town could support with the 6,000 residents.
So the main category where we're underserved is in food purchased for home. And Roland's is a very small shopping center for a population of this size, not just 6,000 here, but North Beach and the surrounding area. So there's capacity in the market to support more of that type of use. And some other small specialty type.
I think a lot of
retail,
professional
cafes and things
services
like that.
was identified.
There's essentially no
Medical.
professional services or offices, very little medical in this whole kind of region. And certainly none of the larger ticket items like you mentioned, furniture or specialized retail. That's, you go to Dunkirk for
But
that.
it's not something that I think is a negative because we certainly are able to go down to the next street or next road or next town and get what we need to have. So I'm concerned about putting something in here that looks negative when in fact, for such a small town, we have a pretty good assortment of things, I think, for our needs. And yes, if we wanted to get to the doctor immediately, we could go down to North. I mean, so basically in the town next to us, we do have the extra things that we maybe can enhance our shopping, needs. So I'm just a little concerned about writing it in a negative tone that indicates that we're lacking, when I really think that, yeah, we could probably maybe have a little gift store maybe, but I think we're going to probably have that down here at the hotel anyway. I have a feeling we're going to see some of those little shops down there coming in, and probably here where the library is going to go out. So I don't know that that is necessarily a pertinent paragraph right there. And then if you go down, no. Okay, I was going to go to the next page, on page 6. You say Chesapeake Beach does not have a set of specialized retail uses such as ice cream parlors, cafes, and specialty gifts. Is that supposed to be specialty gifts? I think that
Yes.
word is supposed to be
Yes,
specialty
yes.
gifts. Okay.
Right.
Again, I'm just not sure. I think you need to write this in a negative way. I would say, whereas North Beach has these, we have those, and we could possibly encourage other uses as well. I'm just saying, turn it around into a more positive frame.
Or even if we had some data, like what people want. Like,
Chris,
surveys.
can you put that presentation
Town
into the
surveys.
Dropbox that you gave us early
Yes.
on?
I sure will.
But was that, I don't remember if that presentation actually brought in data from what the community actually said they needed and wanted.
Some of
Did
that
it?
might
I
be
don't
on the
remember.
I thought it
postal
did.
board too.
Did it have actual data from what the town residents have said?
I think
so.
it said, what did we go out of town
It said what
for?
we had, okay, fine,
I
but
would be curious.
do we
Well, I think it
care?
looked at, I mean,
do we care?
it looked at what people shop for at different age groups was what it was focused on, if I remember.
Yeah, and what it was a preliminary market analysis to suggest where there's leakage in the retail environment, where people are apt to spend money elsewhere because services aren't provided here. But there hadn't been a survey of what people want or their opinions or attitudes towards retail, so that's not in that piece.
And I think going back to Lori's question about what the survey indicated, I don't think that was on the survey, was it? I don't remember anything about
No, we
our
didn't do-
shopping needs or anything like that. I don't think it was. No. Okay. But anyway, it's just the way I like to have these kind of things written. I like it more positively directed. I don't know. Is anybody concerned, or do you understand what I'm saying about that?
I agree with you. I agree with you.
Want to sell our town.
Yeah, and
I
that's,
like our
yeah,
town.
This is a sales
It
document.
is a sale,
It is a
exactly.
sales
And you don't want to
document.
make it look like we don't have something when we really have everything.
Don't have a fair beach.
We don't have a Ferris wheel. That's what we need on the pier. No.
I certainly support the idea of positive, where possible, being positive like that.
Yeah.
I support the idea of doing market research.
So this draft is not completed. The park and open space element is not addressed yet. And except to explain what the current
Right.
conditions are.
Since we're doing a minor editorial, it's on page 5. Last full paragraph says Button Chesapeake in 2018, say Button Chesapeake Beach in 2018.
Okay.
But Chris, you're going to keep making edits, changes to this, filling in some of the gaps, and then we're going to get together in, when's our August meeting? Oh, we don't have one in August?
Yeah, I won't be here. But
Okay.
But we can meet ourselves.
You've typically taken August off. You don't have to, but I won't be here. You don't need me. You have this draft and the changes to
Will you have revisions that we could review? Let me
I'll
add,
have this chapter finished. This
okay.
land use chapter, which is I think the most substantive chapter of the whole thing. So
And
that
not
you
in Dropbox, right?
can- I'll put it in Dropbox for you.
Yeah, no, I know, but I'm saying it's not there now, right?
No, it's not. No.
So when we talk about it, I haven't had a chance to read the land use section yet, so I assume we're going to have a discussion about it.
Is it possible for put things in the Dropbox to be discussed? Like, I don't want to break any of these, like.
That's what we did with the natural resources.
No, I mean, like, if I wanted to put something in the Dropbox, would that be
Oh,
appropriate or not?
Yeah.
It's your commission.
I mean, we did that with some of the mixed use stuff for Missing Middle High. I mean, I've dropped stuff in there before.
I might want to drop just one thing in.
I just want to
Go
go,
ahead and do this.
I want to go back to the notion of an August meeting. So I'm more than happy to meet in August. We met twice this month. I'm more than happy to meet in August. With all due respect to us as a body, I don't mind working hard. I don't want to work stupid. And I don't know how productive we're really
Me-
going to be
yeah.
without Chris here to hear the editorial comments. So
I
I'm
mean-
happy to meet, but I
That's what I was going to ask if we
twice
thought it
in
was
September
worthwhile.
If Chris is back then, but I just don't see the value in meeting.
I'm fine with that. I'll come
So I
twice.
have it on my calendar that we were meeting on the 14th. We're now taking that off the calendar.
I kind of agree with Charlie, but I didn't want to be the, I mean, I felt like we
I
were trying to
agree
get
also.
You
some.
wanted me to say it instead of you.
No, but I mean-
Fine.
Wasn't
How
that?
about if I make a motion that we not meet in August?
Second.
There you go. All those in favor say aye.
I
All right, we're not going to meet in August. We'll meet in September, and but I will say, I mean, if there's stuff you want to drop in there for us to, to read at our leisure while we're having a beverage in town somewhere, feel free to drop it in. And same with you, Chris. As you prepare things, I think it would be good for us to take a look at it before we get, that probably gives us some time to throw some comments out there. Chris might even get a chance to look at our comments before we get together in September, and I think we're the second Wednesday in September then, whatever that date is.
Chris, I haven't had a chance to read the land use one, but something we've talked about before is the orphaned properties around Chesapeake Beach, alleys and such. Is that addressed in here?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good.
I was thinking of you when I was writing it.
Okay. The other thing is Kellum's Field. eh, we've talked about, we haven't talked about, but some people have talked to me about the town taking control of it from the county. And do we address that in this section?
It will be addressed under the section about parks and open spaces.
Okay,
Yes.
because I think that would be important.
We heard a lot about that in the vision workshops we had. People said they wanted to have multiple use of it, and they confirmed that strongly in the survey.
And it's always a topic at town council, always. Does anybody have any other comments before we adjourn tonight? I appreciate everybody's commitment and dedication to sticking with us. I know we all have long days, but I really do appreciate it. And I do encourage this dialogue and discussion because I think it's going to get us to a better product at the end. I know it feels like we might not get there, but I believe in the process. I believe Chris is going to help guide us there. And I think we will get there. Just let's keep working at it. So thank you. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Our work session is adjourned. Thank you.
Meeting. Long.
And don't ever feel that we don't want your participation. We do. We absolutely do want your participation. So don't feel silly about it.
Thank you.
Whatever you do.
Very nice of you. I know that